Good afternoon and welcome to the May 30th special meeting of the City Council and its annual budget workshop. We'll call the meeting to order and I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Vice Mayor Bernasconi.
Here.
Councilmember Alvord.
Here.
Councilmember Rakucci.
Here.
Councilmember Mendonça. Here. And Mayor Haddishelt.
Here. I'd like to ask Mr. Plecker to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I want to ask the clerk to read meeting procedures.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's May 30th, 2023 City Council Budget Workshop. If you've not already picked up an agenda, they are available over there on the staff table. If you're here to speak to an item not on today's agenda, you may do so under public comment. There is a 25-minute time limit for public comment with 3 minutes allotted for each speaker. As a reminder, the Brown Act does not allow the City Council to take action on items not appearing on the agenda. If you wish to speak to an item that is on the agenda, you may do so prior to final action being taken, and you must stay within a 5-minute time limit. When addressing the City Council, please approach the podium and direct your comments to the mayor. Speaker time limits will all be monitored. When the light blinks yellow, you'll have 1 minute to conclude your comments, and when the light blinks red, you'll be asked to be seated. If you address the City Council, we would sure appreciate your name for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. And as the clerk said, we'll next roll into comments for items not on the agenda. Is there anyone here who would like to make public comment on non-agenda items? Seeing none, we'll move on to the main event here, which is our budget workshop, and I'll ask our city manager, Dom Casey, to open the workshop.
Well, thank you, and good evening, Mayor and City Council. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I'm going to not introduce the speakers yet because there's a lot of them, and they will introduce themselves as they come up this evening. But we come before you, as I said, to introduce the 2023-2024 fiscal year budget. And to this point, this is a result of tens of thousands of staff hours, literally, in all levels of the organization. Many of those are sitting in this room this evening, so I'd like to thank you now as well. And you'll hear from them and many of us through the night this evening. Well, hopefully not to the night, this evening. But it is a lot of work, and it's a very important document. We've had planning sessions with each of the departments, which also includes all the department head groups. And we've asked our residents, our customers, and our businesses for their input and feedback. We've received direction from this council in your annual strategic priorities workshop, as well as every other city council meeting. Our staff has had enlightening discussions, some tough discussions. We've shared perspectives, we've advocated for positions, and we've all lamented over new regulations and how to tackle some of the supply chain issues, and we've dealt with unfunded state mandates. And we've celebrated the success and efforts that we've been pursuing, often for years. When we see all of these start to come to fruition, as we've seen in this budget as well as in past budgets. Through it all, we never take for granted the trust we've built with this city council, with our residents and businesses, and with one another. This takes years of consistent, thoughtful, measured actions and results in a community that has received dozens of accolades each year, most of which we've never sought out. When the list makers crunch the data, Roseville often appears on the list of quality of life for being fiscally responsible, and that is the significant basis for many of our recognitions. It allows for many positive things to take shape. So all that's to say, it's a long road to get here to present tonight's budget, which again is our most important policy document. You will see a lot of numbers tonight, which all indicate what we value. Some of those are fiscal responsibility, planning, prudence, innovation, high performance, public service, and a high quality of life. The Council's focus on fiscal responsibility in its strategic plan is multifaceted, and it includes controlling costs, recovering fees for services, and looking for ways to enhance revenues to avoid future cuts in service. We got a quality of life boost this year with an overwhelming approval of the voters this last fall to raise the hotel tax in our community for the first time in 47 years. This will align our hotel tax rate more closely with our neighbors with cities throughout the state. We're allocating these funds to general government services, including public safety, roads, recreation, and parks, all of which our visitors use those services. Part of that vision for visitors and residents is the creation of the Roseville Soccer Complex, which will break ground next week. It will draw people here from all over the state and more. Amenities like this draw potential residents here who will experience our quality of life, but it will also enhance the quality of life for all those who live here. The quality of life of our utilities, our business climate, and our business climate are also what bring big investments here from businesses. The biggest proposed investment, certainly for Roseville, but is on a national scale, is the most recent 1.5 potential investment from Bosch, who will make electric car components in its acquisition for TSI. This move will provide significant jobs and economies and will elevate Roseville's stature on the national and international level for years to come. And those are just two of the new exciting announcements we've had this past month. But I do not want to forget, in addition to what you see in the bulk of the draft budget enclosed in this document, is really the care and feeding for the city of Roseville. That's much of what this budget makes up, are the services that our residents have come to expect, demand, and enjoy, which this council has certainly supported, not only through this budget, but other budgets. It's never easy to balance the needs of the future with the needs of today. And as our demands and resources continue to grow, we must thoughtfully and carefully grow to meet them. I believe this proposed budget has done that. A few themes became clear in working with the departments to prepare this year's budget. And that is really attracting specialty positions is getting increasingly difficult for us. Succession planning needs to be prioritized citywide. Regulations are creating significant challenges, cost increases, and increasing the scope and complexity of not only what we do, but how we do it. The supply chain disruptions, in addition to inflation, are creating cost increases and an urgency for us to evaluate how we procure and also some of our other purchasing practices. There has been significant citywide growth in roads, parks, and other infrastructure that demand not only a need for new care, but to rehabilitate our old and aging infrastructure as well. But one thing became clear: people remain energized and excited and are optimistic about the future. So my thanks to each of you for your service on City Council, as you put in the countless hours to understand the complexity of more than 24 business lines, and that we're all in, and all the funding sources and regulations that accompany them. You ask thought-provoking questions, and you give yourselves generously to the community to provide consistent vision, steady guidance, and stable leadership. You are here because you care about the health and well-being and the greater good, and I appreciate the effort each of you put into this. And with that, I would like to provide an overview for tonight's process and go over the budget that brings us here today. So as you'll see, we'll have an introduction to the overview, and we'll provide a fiscal overview for the evening, as well as sort of look out in the future, what we should expect or can expect. And then also, each of the departments will then provide their budgets, the general fund departments, and we'll do some of the general departments. Really, these are the large departments that take up most of the general fund that you'll see before you, with police, fire, parks and recreation, development services, public works, and economic development. And then we'll have a close through there. And as you can see, after each section, we'll have a point for council comment or questions. But if you have a burning questions, feel free to stop in. But this is really an opportunity for the public to stop and pause and take comments and questions after each of those. And just to talk a little bit about the process, as I joked a little about tens of thousands of hours, I really wasn't joking. The budget process, as soon as it stops, when it's adopted, it begins again. And so that's something where, as we start our development counter early in the year in February. We hold our council goals workshop to retain not only the goals, but directions, projects, priorities on the nearly $1 billion budget that will be before you this evening. And our goals are confirmed, and we align our budget and our priorities with those goals and those priorities. And you'll see in this budget this evening that those dollars are aligned with those priorities and goals. Then in addition to that, we have manager reviews where we go over each one of the departments one-on-one. We talk about future needs, we talk about present needs, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, how has the business changed? In a lot of ways we're seeing, we talk about technology and scope and complexity. Again, as we grow, it's not just doing more things, it's how do we do things differently. And so we have those conversations, look at the budget, and really help create a budget that supports the goals of the strategic plan, but also the community needs and the growth. In addition to that, as everyone's well aware, Measure B, a citywide sales tax that was incorporated, was a big part of what gives us the ability to do the things that we're doing today. Generating nearly $30 million. It's something that the community invested and voted for to make sure we were able to provide the services going not only currently but into the future. And so each year with the advisory committee, we look at that. Are we using those general fund dollars to ensure we're keeping not only a high quality of life today, but that high quality of life into the future? And then in addition to that, we also look at our financial policies, we adopt those, and then we begin our budget presentations, which began this year with the utilities on May 17th. And then coming forward, we also looked at we released the budget on the 19th, but in addition to that, and I think there's a slide further down, there is, so I'll wait to get to that, I don't want to spoil it. Where we hold our workshop, which is where we're at today, where we go over the citywide budget presentations, the current fiscal position and trends, and look at our operating budgets for the department. But I think along this time, going back when the budget's released, we also take comment from many of our partners that we communicate this budget with in advance and have copies and share that. And so the next part of the process will be, or the next steps will be June 21st, where the council would officially adopt the budget, should there be any adjustments or changes as we go through between now and then. And then again, with awareness and outreach, this is really an extensive effort. We go online, we talk to our partners, as I was saying, in Sun City and Arcona, which is Roseville Coalition of Neighborhood Associations, which is really a good community outreach tool. The Chamber of Commerce to hit all of our business community and leadership Roseville. Our budget in brief, which I think is a really great tool. We can share that it really dials down the budget and makes it consumable. And we've got a lot of great feedback, so I appreciate the budgets team work on this, but the community really likes this consumable budget, much easier to read and understand versus a large multi-hundred-page document. And then lastly, also with social media, we get a lot of feedback from the budget being out and just ensuring that we want it to be an inclusive process and that along the way people have an opportunity to weigh in, and so our awareness and outreach is geared really towards that. And for the workshop tonight, as I mentioned a little bit, we'll see with the citywide budget overview, we're going to talk about revenues and where we see our revenues going, where we're at currently, and then expenditures. Talk a little bit about staffing. As we said, as we grow, if we want to maintain services, one of the things we have to do, in addition to looking at how we offer services, we have to look at providing new staff to keep up with service levels. And so this budget certainly does that. In the areas, we'll look at our general fund budget overview and compare revenues and expenses, talk about some of those challenges, and go a little through the 5-year forecast and what that looks like going out in the future, largely looking at where our expenses are versus where our revenues, and making sure that as we move forward, we're creating an environment where revenues stay and keep pace and hopefully exceed what our expenses are. And then we look through with the council confirmation of those recommendations that in this budget that we maintain our service levels in our city, which is our mission. We address the new state federal mandates as we move forward. And then we also look at the council strategic plan to ensure that we're enhancing those services that were identified by this council as a high priority. in which making sure that again, the fiscal responsibility is not, it's very important to this council. It's important to us as a management team. And so we'll talk about maintaining reserves and how to pay down our obligations to ensure that we have future capacity by making good decisions with additional surplus money now. And talked a little bit about Measure B priorities, so I won't reiterate that. But as we do, as you can see, when we have a balanced scorecard that really measures out what we're doing with that general fund money, it demonstrates that we're hitting those priorities, and they remain to be a high priority and well funded. Which one great example of that will be the new fire department being fully staffed and built out this next year. Again, to make sure that our response times, our calls for service, we can maintain that level of service as we grow. And then just an overview summary of the fiscal responsibility. As I talked about those department meetings, these are really what we're talking about, the fiscal responsibility, making sure we're living within our means, we're providing core services, and that we look at where are the blind spots? Where are the things that are coming that could potentially create issues for us? And so, soloing general fund revenue, as we look at potentially, there's not a recession model in here, but certainly it's a concern we talk about with inflation rates and supply chain disruption. Is that something we need to be worried about? And what does that mean? And so running scenarios through there, something that we looked at as concerns. But really, the one of the large concerns I think that will come through this and future workshops is the limited resources available for new capital projects, whether it be new roads, infrastructure, a police expansion, parking garage, additional fire stations out west, large road projects and maintenance projects where roughly $130 to $150 million of demand exists, with probably less than half of that set back. And so we have a job before us to look at prioritizing those projects, prioritizing the funding we have. And that's something, though, is unilaterally across the general fund is something that was a concern that all the department heads expressed that we really need to start working on now. And that the Measure B priorities are well in focus and being there and being supported. This is something that's been important to this council since Measure B passed, and I believe will continue to be important to this council and future councils, as it was a large commitment to the community. Next slide. There we go. Okay, with that, if there are not questions for me, it looks like there might be. I'm going to turn it back over to the mayor and council for questions.
Yeah, that was a lot, and so I did want to see if anybody had any questions for our city manager. I just want to get these numbers in my head, though. You mentioned 130 million in delayed or underfunded capital projects. So every time we add something in, something has to give, right?
That's correct.
And those were decisions made, some by this council, some by previous councils, right? So we have to be kind of prudent.
New needs. There's new needs that have come up that create, but you're exactly right, Mayor.
To be prudent in what we try to burden this budget with as we go forward. And then a question, and you mentioned the tough conversations that happen. I'm sure within certain departments, people want to go faster, quicker, sooner, and that's costly, as you mentioned, with supply chain issues. Is that balanced out with a conversation about, well, if we wait, the horizon might look brighter, and we could, how you to balance out the quality of life with the cost of the quality of life? Is that, assume that's part of the conversations that you have with your department heads?
It is. Looking at ways to be maybe more efficient. One example that comes top of mind is we had a few departments wanting similar positions. Well, some of our functions are decentralized because we can move faster, but some are centralized to where we're able to provide more services to one department. And so we're looking at this year, we added one position that 3 different departments asked for in one department. And we're going to see if we can meet those needs with that one position versus hiring 3 people in 3 different departments. And so it's decisions like that and discussions like that that I think with the heart of always having the best interest of the city. And this is something that those type of discussions happen quite frequently.
Great. With that, we'll all turn on our calculator apps and get to the numbers, right?
With that, I will turn it over to Dennis Kaufman, our ACM and CFO.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Presenting the budget with me today is Scott Pettengill, our Assistant Finance Director. And the agenda for our presentation is on the next slide. Scott's going to start us off talking about the proposed citywide budget, and then he'll give an overview of the general fund revenues and expenditures in the budget. And then I'll take over in the expenditure section and then talk about how the proposed budget helps the city plan for the future. And then I'll present the updated 5-year forecast for the general fund. And then finally, I'll present a summary of the general government department budgets before you hear from each of our operating departments about their budgets. Before I turn the presentation over to Scott, though, I'd like to thank him and Nancy Roethlisberger, our new budget manager, and our incredible budget team for their efforts and their professionalism in publishing this 500-plus page book that captures the City Council's policy goals and priorities in a format that's worthy of recognition from our national and state government finance officers associations for excellence in budget presentation. So with that, thanks, Scott, and go ahead, take it away.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. As Dennis mentioned, I'll be providing an overview of the citywide budget, and I'll start with citywide revenues. Total citywide net revenue budget is $794 million, and this pie chart provides an overview of the funds that make up that $794 million in revenues. The makeup of our revenues is almost identical to the current year. The enterprise funds, including electric, environmental utilities, and transit, make up a majority of the city's revenues at 56% or $445 million. The next largest source of revenue is the general fund, which makes up 27% of all revenues and funds departments including police, fire, parks, recreation, and libraries. The balance of the revenues are reflected in the other funds category and includes resources from sources such as special districts, development fees, and golf fees. The other funds revenue make up 17% of all citywide revenues at approximately $134 million. Next, I'll review total citywide expenditures. Our citywide expenditure budget totals $784 million, and the proportional share of each of the major spending categories, including the proposed budget, is similar to prior years. Salary, wages, and benefits and material service supplies make a majority of our spending plan. The largest spending category is salary, wages, and benefits, which makes up about 36% of our budget at $278.6 million. The next largest category is material service supplies at 26% or $206.8 million. 19% or $147.8 million of the proposed budget is allocated for capital projects, and 11% or $88.7 million will be spent on electric purchase, power, and supply. The remaining 8% of the spending plan, as indicated in the other category, includes spending for debt service and transfers to other funds, which equates to about $62 million. Next, I'll review the staffing level changes included in the budget. Total citywide staffing is proposed to increase by 30 net positions in the budget from 1,328 to 1,358. This represents about a 2% increase in staffing citywide. The most significant increases were in fire with 10 additional positions and parks, recreation, and libraries with 7 new positions. On the next slide, I'll go into these numbers in a little detail because there's quite a few moving parts in how we get to that 30 new position number. A lot of columns on the slide. So I'll walk you through them. As you can see, the first column lists all departments with position changes. The second column from left is titled New and reflects all the new positions included in the budget. In total, the budget includes 35 new positions. The third column is titled Adjustments. And as you can see from the slide, we have eliminated a total of 5 position allocations in the budget, and they include the elimination of 4 positions in the IT department related to promotional reclassifications that were approved in a prior year, and the elimination of 1 grant-funded police officer position because the grant has come to an end. The fourth column captures position reorganizations included in the budget. It moves two positions from environmental utilities to IT to transfer the technology oversight of the city's enterprise asset management system, Maximo, from EU to IT. Secondly, we are moving one department PIO from the Police Department to the Public Affairs and Communications Department to support citywide organizational, cultural, and leadership efforts, police communications training, and legislative advocacy. The fifth column highlighted in green is the net total change in the budget, which ties to the 30 positions referenced in the prior slide. In addition, the proposed budget includes funding for 8 positions, which is detailed in the last column on the slide. These positions currently don't have a classification established yet, so HR will be returning to City Council at a later date to establish these new classifications and position allocations. As an example, we're recommending the establishment of a new procurement supervisor classification in the Finance Department. We've included the cost of this position in the budget, but HR will be returning to City Council once the new classification has been established, and at that time, HR will also adjust the position allocation schedule. The new positions in the Development Services, Economic Development, Fire, Police, Parks, Recreation, Libraries, and Public Works Department will be described in detail in their individual presentations today, and EU provide an overview of their position increases in their budget preview presentation. Next, I'm going to review the position changes included in the budget for those departments that don't have a separate presentation today. The 2 new positions in finance include support for payroll and a new senior accountant position to improve and monitor the city's internal controls. Increasing work complexity and workload associated with growing city necessitate these additional resources. As mentioned earlier, the budget also includes funding for a new purchasing supervisor classification to ensure appropriate oversight of the city's procurement functions. The additional HR analyst position will support the electric and EU departments. This position will assist in performing timely performance consultation, investigations, addressing complex leave issues, developing and implementing new practices and programs, succession planning, and preparing supervisor resources. IT staffing levels remain the same overall at 58 positions. The budget includes 2 new positions for computer and software support and server, storage, network, telecommunications, and radio support. As mentioned earlier, IT staffing levels will also include the 2 positions moved from EU to IT to support the citywide asset management system. Also mentioned earlier, these additional positions are offset by the 4 limited positions related to those promotional reclassifications. Lastly, 2 new positions are included in the Public Affairs and Communications Department, one to support police community relations and communications outreach, and the other to support video broadcasting of city council meetings and digital and video outreach for cultural and recruitment branding. These 2 new positions, plus the department PIO that is being moved from PD to Public Affairs, results in an overall net increase of 3 positions. This next table summarizes all these recommended position increases by city council priority and identifies if the position was growth-related, enhances service levels, or is required because of state or federal mandates. Of the 30 net recommended position included in the proposed budget, 15 support the priority of maintaining a safe and healthy community, 3 support the priority of remaining fiscally responsible in a changing world, 1 position supports economic vitality, 7 support the priority of investing in well-planned infrastructure and growth, 2 support community engagement and advocacy, and lastly, 2 positions support the priority of delivering exceptional city services. A majority of the positions included in the proposed budget are required to maintain services in a growing city, followed by enhanced service levels and state and federal mandates. Next, I'll provide an overview of our 5-year capital improvement program. The proposed budget includes $130 million of capital and project appropriations, with the majority of these projects in Public Works, Roseville Electric, and Water, as well as Parks, Recreation, and Libraries. An overview of the proposed projects included in the budget was presented to the City Council previously. Some of the highlighted projects include the Roseville Soccer Complex, Weber Park, roadway resurfacing, and aquifer storage and recovery wells. Staff have also incorporated the department's long-term capital planning in the 5-year capital improvement program, including the budget book, with almost $485 million in capital spending anticipated over the next 5 years. I'll now move on to providing an overview of the general fund budget, starting with the revenue estimates included. The general fund revenue budget is based on the primary assumption that revenues will continue to grow next year, but at a slower pace than the past year, based on what we've seen so far in the current year and our consultants' forecasts. The three largest revenue sources in the general fund are Bradley Burns sales tax, the Measure B local sales tax, and property tax. Bradley Burns is projected to grow about 2% when comparing to FY23 projected revenues. This 2% growth rate equates to an estimate of $72.7 million, which is what we have included in the proposed budget. This forecast is based on our sales tax consultants' most likely projection. Measure B revenue is projected to increase by about 1% compared to fiscal year 23 projected revenues. This 1% growth rate equates to $29.8 million, which is also based on our consultants' most likely projection. Property tax revenue is estimated to grow by 6% to $70.3 million for next year. I did want to highlight that it's important to note that a portion of our property tax revenue growth is returned to the county under the city's annexation tax sharing agreements. The total general fund operating revenue budget is $225 million, and this pie chart shows the general fund revenue contributions from each source, with Bradley Burns sales tax, Measure B sales tax, and property tax making up 76% of general fund revenue. The remaining 24% is made up of licenses and permits, electric franchise fees, and charges for service, as well as other taxes. On this next slide provides an overview of our Bradley Burns sales tax by category, and this information is based on the fiscal year 23 actuals received to date, or the current year. Sales tax received from general retail, including Roseville Galleria, and transportation-related purchases, including at the Roseville Auto Mall, and gas stations, make a majority of our sales tax revenue from local businesses at 67%. The remaining revenue comes from food products, business-to-business, and construction activity. This next graph shows the city's top 4 retail tax generators and their trends back to the second quarter of 2020, which was during the pandemic. Creekside Mall and Fountains, which are represented by the bottom 2 lines that are yellow and green, are staying relatively flat. Galleria, which is the orange line, has had steady growth since 2020, with seasonal spikes during the holiday quarters. And at the top, the Roseville Auto Mall continues to grow and hover between $3 million and $3.5 million over the last 2 years. We do pay close attention to this data throughout the year, as well as other sectors of our local economy, so that we can better understand and be able to forecast our sales tax revenue with the help of our consultant. This graph provides a multi-year comparison of sales tax, including the collection of Measure B starting in fiscal year 19. As stated earlier, the proposed budget includes approximately $72.7 million in Bradley Burns revenues and $29.8 million in Measure B. This graph also includes public safety sales tax funding of approximately $1.7 million, bringing the total sales tax revenue to $104 million. And on this next graph, we show the 10-year history of city's property tax revenues and the amount budgeted for fiscal year 23 at $70 million. The city is experiencing a relatively consistent rate of growth in property tax revenues due to growth in the city as well as rising property values. Building permits were on the rise for single-family residences as new development continues to bring in more property taxes. With information from our property tax consultant, staff will be monitoring the housing market activity and property value trends for their impact on future property tax revenues. So I'll conclude my section with an overview of the general fund expenditures by department. This next dollar slide, graphic slide, provides an overview of the general fund operating expenditures by department. The total general fund operating expenditure budget totals $214 million. Almost half of the operating budget is dedicated towards public safety services. The police department makes up about 28% of the budget at $59 million, and the fire department makes up 21% of the budget at $45 million. The Parks, Recreation, and Libraries department makes up 16% of the general fund at $35 million. The balance of the funding is dedicated towards general government departments, which Dennis will go into a little bit more at a later point in this presentation, as well as the development services and public works departments. The other category includes items such as transfers to other funds and the CalPERS additionary discretionary payment, which Dennis also will go over in a little more detail. This concludes my general fund overview, and now hand it back to Dennis.
Thanks, Scott. So looking at general fund spending by department is one perspective that we use. Another perspective that we look at is the nature of expenditures. And Scott mentioned earlier that the citywide expense budget is about 1/3 made up of labor costs. But in the general fund, it's more than 2/3 of the general fund budget is labor costs because it's city employees and general fund departments that are delivering services directly to residents and businesses. Another perspective that we look at with general fund expenditures is how our discretionary spending of our city's major tax revenues is allocated. And so some general fund expenditures are financed by revenue that's collected for providing a specific service. Other revenue sources are dedicated to specific services and aren't considered discretionary. These kind of non-discretionary revenues total $43 million for next year and consist primarily of charges for services, the electric franchise fee, and permits. In the general fund, more than half of the charges for services revenue is collected by the Parks, Recreation, and Libraries Department and the Development Services Department. The electric franchise fee, according to the city charter, funds police, fire, and Parks, Recreation, and Libraries. And most of the license and permit revenue is collected by the Police, Fire, and Development Services Departments. And then some general fund expenditures are contractual obligations or they're based on city council policy decisions, and so we consider them non-discretionary, including those tax sharing annexation payments to the county that Scott mentioned and our retiree health benefit payments. So this next graph shows the general fund operating budget, kind of like a filter, starting with $225 million of total operating revenue at the top. And when we subtract out those non-discretionary revenue offsets of $43 million, it leaves $182 million available for spending. Then we subtract those the revenue for those non-discretionary spending of $24 million, and that leaves us $158 million of remaining discretionary tax revenue. More than 1/2 of that amount, $84 million, is proposed to be spent on police and fire, which is about 53% of the discretionary revenue, leaving the remaining $74 million of tax revenue to be allocated to everything else in the general fund, including parks, recreation, and libraries, streets, floodplain management, code enforcement, economic development, and the general government departments. So developing the general fund budget involves estimating revenues and expenditures for next fiscal year, but the process also focuses, as Dom mentioned, on planning for the future, using the city's financial policies as a guide. Those financial policies establish and maintain reserves to help the city weather the future economic downturns. The policy also reflects council's goals to address the city's pension liability using a pension trust fund and additional discretionary payments to CalPERS. And the policies call for staff to prepare a general fund 5-year forecast to help us plan for the future. First, on reserves, after budgeting for the growing costs of city operations and the recommended augmentations that you'll hear tonight, the proposed budget includes transferring $2.1 million of general fund resources into the stabilization reserve to achieve the council policy target of 15% of general fund operating expenditures. The purpose of that stabilization reserve is to address revenue shortfalls caused by economic downturns. The budget also has a transfer of $1.3 million into the general fund emergency reserve to maintain the city council policy target of 10% of general fund operating expenditures. And the purpose of this reserve is to address expenditures that would be necessary during an emergency. With the reserves up to the policy targets, then staff recommends taking additional steps to address the city's pension liabilities with CalPERS. The City Council established a strategy to address pension liabilities after general fund reserve targets are met under its strategic plan goal to remain fiscally responsible. And last year, the City Council approved an updated pension funding policy that includes establishing a Section 115 pension trust fund. Section 115 is an Internal Revenue Code section that allows establishing a tax-exempt trust for a governmental purpose. A pension trust can be used to set aside resources to meet future pension contributions or to address our pension liability. The resources would be irrevocably committed for pension contributions or obligations, and the trust can be used as a rate stabilization fund to ease budgetary pressures during an economic downturn when the city faces significant spikes in the employer contribution rates that would be required by CalPERS. The proposed budget includes committing $4.6 million into the trust fund next fiscal year. The proposed budget also includes $4.6 million to make the city's third additional discretionary payment, or ADP, to CalPERS. For a little context, I pulled in some of the data from the most recent CalPERS actuarial valuation. The city's overall funded ratio was about 73%, when the ideal ratio, actuaries tell us, is between 80 and 95%. Please remember that we expect the next actuarial valuation report that comes out this summer to show that funded ratio will probably drop down to about 65% because of the negative 7.5% investment return last fiscal year that CalPERS experienced. The total unfunded liability was $336 million based on the last actuarial valuation. That's the portion of the city's total liability that isn't currently funded, and we expect that amount to rise above $400 million again when we get the next report. The estimated citywide costs for next fiscal year for required contributions to CalPERS is $52 million, and of that, $30 million will come from the general fund. So among the benefits of making additional payments to CalPERS are paying down that unfunded liability, increasing the funded status of the plan, and reducing future pension costs to fund future capacity in the budget so that we can continue maintaining our service levels. The proposed budget includes making the city's third ADP to CalPERS for $4.6 million, which we'll use to pay off another slice of that liability that will reduce the general fund pension costs by a little more than $300,000 per year for 23 years. Addressing the city's pension liability and maintaining reserves are ways that the budget prepares us for the future. Another tool we use to prepare for the future is our general fund 5-year forecast. We prepare this 5-year forecast for several reasons. It helps staff make financial recommendations. It puts council's decisions into context. And it's a valuable exercise to identify and understand the factors or the drivers that affect our revenues and expenses. This exercise, when we repeat it regularly, improves our ability to budget more accurately. So this next graph you probably saw in our budget in brief. It's also in the budget overview section of the budget book as a snapshot of the base case revenue scenario compared to projected expenditure growth. It shows expenditures growing faster than revenues to a point where the lines could cross in the future. The value of performing this process every year is to identify this type of scenario well in advance so we can take necessary actions as the future becomes clearer. Since the future is filled with so much uncertainty, this graph really is too simple to explain the process that we go through and the potential outcomes in the future, so I'll share some of the assumptions and I'll walk you briefly through the process. So first of all, we base our 5-year forecast on a whole bunch of assumptions, and things that are included in the forecast are things that are known to us. Labor cost increases based on our current memorandums of understanding. Those are our labor contracts. We also assume inflation will be slowing over the 5-year forecast, which is what we hear from leading economists. Our forecast includes making contributions for those underfunded obligations, including pension, other post-employment benefits, which are those retiree health benefits, and our capital improvement program rehabilitation. We also include any known state or federal mandates that affect our city departments. We've also included this year the billboard revenue for the first time. Things that we don't include, though, are things that are in the future that we can't quantify, such as what will happen in our next round of bargaining agreements. If this period of high inflation continues or gets worse, we're not taking that into account. We're also not considering any new federal or state regulations that could affect our costs, as well as new revenue sources. We had a recent council item that approved the start of a new commercial retail center, and we're not including any revenue from that retail center in our 5-year forecast until it actually comes to be. So the forecast is developed first by looking at future growth rates of general fund revenues. And since the future is very uncertain, we built a base outlook or base scenario, and then we create a more optimistic and a more pessimistic scenario. The three scenarios start at the left there with fiscal year 2024 revenue of $225 million that's in the budget and grow to between $255 to $283 million. So the difference out in 2029 is a difference of $28 million, which is a pretty big difference. This next graph shows the general fund operating expenditures forecast starting at $215 million in the proposed budget and growing to $278 million over the next 6 years. The dip in fiscal year 2025 is due to one-time expenses, those contributions to the pension trust and the additional payment to CalPERS. We don't assume those in the future until council approves those. And so that's why it looks like there's kind of a flat and then an increase. The assumptions for expenditure growth in the 5-year forecast assume 8 to 10 new positions each year funded by the general fund to maintain city service levels while keeping up with the city's growth. The assumptions also include modest compensation increases to maintain competitive salaries and benefits, plus any known pension costs and medical premium increases. So this next graph plots those three revenue scenarios on top of the expenditure forecast. And you can see the revenue lines start above the bar on the far left in 2024, but then depending on the scenario, fall below the top of the expenditure bar starting in 2027. We have the next slide that shows it a little closer up with the same data, just with a different scale to make it a little easier to see the difference between the three revenue bars. The less favorable outlook shows a small deficit in 2027, while the more likely and the optimistic outlooks have the expenditures catching up closer to revenues in fiscal year 2028 or 2029. Hopefully this close-up view demonstrates the uncertainty of forecasting out several years and the variety of potential outcomes in the future. But I think it's also important to point out that unless there's a significant recession, the city would be able to balance its budget by slowing expenditure growth to match revenue growth. Where staff are assuming adding positions each year in the 5-year forecast, there could be years with stagnant revenue growth where fewer positions are added, for example. The city also has the reserves I mentioned earlier to be prepared for an economic downturn. And then finally, as we've added the last few years, we have included an example recession forecast as a tool to recognize the importance of long-term financial planning. And the dotted orange line adds another line to this graph, reflects an example recession that could start in fiscal year 2025 and have lasting impacts for several years. Staff are not predicting when the next recession could happen, but it's important to keep the risk of the next recession in mind. Some economists are wondering if we're already in a recession or if we'll see a recession later this year, but hopefully any downturn would be very mild. But maintaining our general fund reserves will be a critical tool for the city to navigate the first couple years of any future recession. As this graph shows, a recession half as deep and half as long as the Great Recession would have a significant impact on our revenues and require reductions in services in conjunction with strategic use of our reserves. The stabilization reserve may not completely eliminate the need to reduce services, but it will give the city time to adjust prudently. Again, I want to reiterate that this recession forecast is an example. Our 5-year forecast is based on many, many assumptions that are not expected to be 100% accurate. But the takeaway from this whole 5-year forecast is that while Measure B and now Measure C and the rest of the city's general fund tax revenues are allowing us to maintain city services and Roseville's quality of life, the city needs to continue to be vigilant and in preparing for the future by maintaining those reserves, by updating our fees for appropriate cost recovery, by building future capacity in the budget with tools like the additional payments to CalPERS and the pension trust, as well as continuing to look for ways to be more efficient. So my last section will be an overview of the budgets for the general government departments, and then we'll take a break before you hear from each of the city's operating departments. We have one slide, one table that summarizes the budgets of all of the other departments, these general government departments, with columns for fiscal year 22 actual expenses, fiscal year 23 amended budget, fiscal year 24 proposed budget, and the difference between fiscal year 23 and 24. I want to point out all of these departments, except for IT, are recipients of indirect cost reimbursements from our other city funds, and those reimbursements cause fluctuations from year to year based on our cost allocation plan methodology. You'll hear me mention that a couple times. I know that's a mouthful, but it does cause some variation in some of these departments. Starting with the city council budget, you see a significant increase there, and it's primarily due to the membership fees for the Local Agency Formation Commission, known as LAFCO. It's also due to reduced indirect cost reimbursements.
Could you say that again?
Yes.
Yeah.
The membership fees for LAFCO, the Local Agency Formation Commission, have gone up significantly.
I want the record to reflect, this is not city council.
Yeah, we're not getting paid
We're
this.
not getting raises?
Right. This
That is correct. That
I
is
want the
correct.
record to reflect strongly that this is memberships in organizations that we have to,
Forced upon us.
right, thank you.
You're welcome. For the city manager's office, the increase is due to labor costs and reduced indirect cost plan reimbursements, partially offset by moving some materials, services, and supplies budget to public affairs related to our organizational culture and leadership program. Our city clerk department shows a decrease, and that's due to lower costs for elections this year because November is not a city council election cycle. And theirs is partially offset by higher labor costs and some higher cost plan reimbursements. The city attorney's office has an increase in material services and supplies due to inflation, but also partially offset by higher indirect cost reimbursements. The finance department has increases for the positions that Scott mentioned earlier, plus inflationary increases for some of our professional service contracts. We also have included a one-time augmentation to develop a general fund equipment inventory and replacement process for our CIP rehab program. And we have lower indirect cost reimbursements this year. The HR department has significant increases in the general liability insurance premiums and our workers' compensation claims costs that are affecting the general fund and all of our city funds, plus the analyst position that Scott mentioned in his presentation. With the IT department, we have an increase in labor costs as well as material services and supplies that have been affected by inflation, but also supply chain issues have significantly affected our IT material services and supplies. And then finally, our public affairs and communications department has the increases for the positions that Scott mentioned, and then for those organizational culture and leadership budget reallocation that I mentioned, which again, partially offset by higher indirect cost reimbursements. So I know that that is a lot. And so far, you've heard then an overview of the citywide budget, the general fund budget, including the 5-year forecast, and those general government departments. After a break for questions and public comment, you'll hear from each of the department heads about their department budgets. And at this point, that concludes our presentation, and we're available to answer any questions.
Great. Ask council what questions they have. Councilman Albert?
I have a couple questions. On slide 14, the revenue highlights in the proposed budget, it talked about the Bradley Burns sales tax and the Measure B sales tax. I know in Bradley Burns, it showed 1.8%. In Measure B, it was only 1%. And I know the difference, but I just wondering if you could explain that why those aren't the same, because it's just sales tax. But I know we have some things that don't get taxed with the extra. So would you mind just addressing that for the public watching?
Sure, yeah, the Measure B is a local sales tax, and the rules are a little different than the Bradley Burns sales tax. And the biggest example of the difference is at the auto mall. If a Roseville resident goes to the auto mall and buys a vehicle, we get the Bradley Burns sales tax, which is the 1%, and we get the 0.5% Measure B sales tax. If somebody from outside of Roseville comes to the Roseville Auto Mall and buys a car, we get the 1% Bradley Burns sales tax, but we do not get the Measure B sales tax. And so just the tax base is different, and that's just one example, but it's the biggest example.
Great, thank you. And I also had on the slide 31 where we have the crossing. This is the most stressful slide in this whole presentation, I think. And I mentioned this in past budget times, but I'll say it again. Back when I first got on council, I was the only council member here during that time, and we were in a crisis situation. We were below the cross, and our expenses were far above our revenues. And every year for a couple of years, all we were doing was cutting another $5 million in services, another $5 million in services. And we were getting really thin. We weren't hiring. Our police department wasn't covering like they should. We weren't, our fire department was really thin. We were cutting recreation programs. We shut down the Maidu Center. We stopped fireworks. I mean, it was just getting horrible. And the goats got the most complaints, I think, from many. We had to cut the goats, which was a minor budget thing, but in comparison, it was a horrible time to be on council. It was just miserable because really the quality of life that we all love about Roseville was going away because we just didn't have the money to afford it. So Measure B saved us. It separated that and pushed it out. But I'm looking now at 28 possible crossing. I know you explained, there's lots of factors going in. And so I just wanted to ask about a couple things. So one thing you said, a commercial retail center isn't included in there, and that we're talking about the baseline marketplace, which we're expecting to be the second largest commercial when at full build out. Okay, so that'll be a significant help once that's out, but we can't include it yet. And then there's no factoring of a potential industrial park that we were talking about with a large economic prosperity factor that we were looking at before, so that's not included in here.
Correct.
And then how about TOT as a result of our soccer complex? Because we're expecting a lot more influx of teams. Is that included in here?
No, not
That's
yet.
not?
No.
Okay. All right, so so that gives me a little bit of relief.
Good.
Because we have some potential revenue that could be coming in the future that would help keep that separated for a few more years, hopefully.
Yes.
So, okay, good. That's just so stressful when we get to that crossing point. It makes things a lot different, so, thank you.
Vice Mayor
I don't
Bernasconi?
have any questions yet. Thank you.
Councilwoman Rakucci?
No, with the crossing, it's watching what the state and federal government's doing and what happens with inflation and everything around us. But as much as I don't like the little crossings, it's really an opportunity to look in the future and making sure that we're aware of this and the potential of we can help turn that around, despite the state and federal government.
Member Mendoza?
So, one question on the example recession forecast. When I got my binder, there's certain things I went to immediately to look at, as I have done in past years. But I certainly appreciate you putting that slide up and kind of explaining. I always like to know worst case scenario. But my question is, how often we're working obviously with people that are watching this and experts and like yourself and others. Is this something that we're getting reports and looking at on a quarterly basis? Is this more an annual exercise for this particular meeting that we do? I'm just kind of wondering, because as I look at this, 28, 29 is not that far off. We're almost halfway through 2023. So is there a prescribed schedule that we're getting updates on this, or how are we following this?
Well, I'd answer that in two different ways. So we're typically updating this 5-year forecast 1 or 2 times a year, but we're monitoring our revenues on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And with sales tax being our largest general fund revenue source, we get new information every month, and we're watching that very closely. As you know, the last couple of years, we've had great sales tax growth in the city, but over the last 9 months, it's slowed down significantly. And so when our consultants tell us they're thinking we should see 2% next year, based on the last couple of years, I would say, wow, that sounds so conservative. But based on what we're seeing month by month in the current year, that 2% looks realistic. And so I would say we're watching it very closely as we go along.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
Great. You mentioned that the city's going to pay $30 million of a $52 million obligation at CalPERS.
$30 million is the general fund portion, $52 million is the total citywide.
Okay, so the other portion comes from where?
Primarily the enterprise funds, the utilities, Roseville Electric and Environmental Utilities, but it's transit, youth development, all of our other funds.
Great. and picking up on the 5-year forecast, so the revenue's not in there, but the expenditure that we've made the investment for baseline marketplace is in there, right?
This is general fund, so it does not include
it's
correct.
Gotcha, it's in, thank you, it's in that other fund, okay. Kim, I don't have slide numbers. Let me just say that when we first saw the crossing, that was fiscal year '23. In our first, Measure B pamphlet that came out, so we're significantly down the road from then, so. There was a slide, though. There were a series of slides that you showed the expenditures and the revenues. And for the first year, can we go back to that slide? I'm sorry, I don't have the number. It's towards the end. Yeah, that one right there, Tracy.
I think it's
I just want to make sure.
by department. The one by department. Oh, sorry.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Was it 34?
Yeah.
34? Let's try 34.
Or 35?
35. No, let's start with 34. Yeah, 34. In 34, it shows the number 215 million. I need to understand, because I thought we were talking about 225 million.
This is expenditures.
This is
And the
expenditures.
225 is revenue.
225 is revenue.
And you can
Okay.
see that on the next slide. Because the revenue line is above the expense bar.
Okay. That was my other question. Okay. That's all the questions I had. Thanks. I'll open it up for public comment. Close public comment. Any other council comments? I will say goats are valuable. They're more valuable. It's that proposition of value versus cost, right? So, and with that, no actions required, and we'll go on, begin our department head overviews with Chief Bergstrom. And you have 3 minutes, Chief. Oh, sorry.
All right, it might be longer than 3 minutes, but I'll get you there. Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Troy Bergstrom, your Chief of Police. With me is Mark Pinato, who's our budget analyst for the Police Department. And we're going to walk you through our budget request here for the coming year. Last year, you saw several initiatives and increased projects within the Police Department. And we, thankfully to you, we had some increased funding to make all that happen. This year, you'll see within the Police Department, we're staying a little bit lower key this year with the initiatives and projects that we have coming forward. So a bit more of a straightforward budget. Within the Police Department, we have 4 operating divisions. Our Operations Division is the largest in the Police Department. This is the home of patrol. And over 60% of our staffing and our funding goes through our Operations Division. These are the folks that are our frontline law enforcement services. Our Investigation Services Division is home to our detective units, our regional task force assignments, our crime suppression unit, crime analysis, and our real-time crime center. Community Services is the home of our social services unit, our school resource officers, our traffic unit, animal control, professional standards, public affairs, and our budget team. Well, Mark's our team. And lastly is our Professional Services Division. This is led by our 2 police administrators. This includes our dispatch center, property and evidence, our crime scene investigators, and our records unit. You can also see how our budget process is broken up for those 4 divisions into the 9 different areas that make up our police department budget. On our next slide, you'll see the pie chart that breaks down the police department. As I mentioned, the majority of our budget and staffing is in our patrol division, which makes up almost half of our entire police department budget. This year, our request heading into the coming year is at $59.5 million in comparison to last year, which was at $54.8 million. The police department is entirely a people-driven business. To do what we do every day accounts for people, and that's what the majority of our budget includes. So we'll talk about in our budget highlights as far as new positions go. In reality for this year, we're going to come in with the exact same number of positions as we had last year, so this is really a reallocating and moving around of different positions within the police department. We will have 223 full-time staff within the police department. 152 of those are sworn police officer positions, and 71 are professional staff positions. With the coming year, our officer staffing will actually go from 153, where we're at currently, to 152. And this is related to a grant-funded position where the grant ended and the person in that position actually retired. So we're not losing an actual position of a live body within the police department. It's just the grant ended and we did not continue with that grant. As far as the new or moving around positions within the police department, the first one is for a community service officer assigned in our investigations unit, and this is within our real-time crime center. I've sent you many council updates of the great work that goes on with our real-time crime center. In reality, that's one person that does all of those things and those updates that I send you about how we use technology resources to be better at what we do every day. This will add a second CSO to real-time crime center and allow us to expend our hours of coverage that we use the crime center to help patrol. The next position, actually the next two positions on there, are both tied to our social services unit. And so with this year, we've been looking at adjusting how we deliver services within social services unit. As you know, part of the social services unit is police officer resources, and part of it is our social work resources. And we're looking to readjust how we do that this year. So the first position on there is a police social services supervisor. I think you all know CJ, who's our social services unit social worker. The way the rules work with social work interns and other things that work on the social work side of it, we have to have someone who's a licensed social worker supervise those positions within the police department. Right now, a sergeant does it, and that's not how the rules are supposed to work. And so what this will do is it will adjust SSU, our social work position, into a supervisor. That position is already doing the supervising of our social work interns, so we just need to adjust it appropriately and pay them the right way because they are supervising. The next part of that is outreach specialists. And so within the social services unit, we have outreach workers that go out every day with our team. Predominantly what they deal with is individuals in our community who are homeless, but they also deal with folks that have mental health crisis and other things. Right now, we use kind of a combination of both college interns and outreach workers that come to us from the County Health and Human Services. We actually haven't had the County Health and Human Services funded positions excuse me, in almost a year, just through the hiring issues that they have. And so we're looking to solidify this a little bit and bring in two of our own within the police department to be in conjunction with the two that come from Health and Human Services. So these are two part-time positions. What our overall goal is to kind of create a bench within SSU on our social work side. So at the lower level, the beginning level, so to speak, is college interns that come in. Majority of them are coming from Sac State as college interns into our social services program. The next step up is our outreach specialists, which are part-time workers. And then the next step up from that is our social work practitioner and then our social work supervisor. And it kind of builds on the side of SSU that is our service-driven model. So that's where those positions come in. The police lieutenant position, I think you heard Dennis and Scott talk about kind of a readjusting of how we do our public affairs role within the police department. And so we've been working with the city manager's office and public affairs to shift over our PIO over to their shop. And in turn, within the police department, we're adjusting it into a lieutenant position. And so we're not adding a position. This is really just the difference in funding between what the PIO used to cost us to what a police lieutenant will cost us to fill the same role. This will make it a extra assignment for a police lieutenant to where it's a special assignment. It gives other opportunities for lieutenants, but I can also use the lieutenant for a lot of other things in the police department that a straight PIO role I couldn't use. And so it gives us a bit more flexibility. And then the last part on there is a part-time position to be added, and this is a police property and evidence clerk. And this is entirely related to the first thing I'm going to talk about in our budget highlights for things we want to add as far as materials and supplies. And so probably the biggest thing that we're looking at adding this year in our budget is the addition of the second piece that began with our body-worn camera project in 2021, which is the adding of car cameras into our patrol vehicles. These cameras will include a forward-facing camera in the front, much that I'm sure you've seen many times on TV, police car dash cameras. It also adds a camera that covers the prisoner transport area in the back seat of our car. It has been probably, I think, when I was a sergeant, when we got rid of our in-car cameras. We then went back to the body cameras in 2021, and this is the next phase of that program. What this does is it gives us more views and more capabilities for what we can see. Our body camera program has been incredibly successful since we installed it. The reality is it has done a great job in protecting our officers from false complaints. 19 of 19 times since we got our body cameras, we have had a complaint come in about officer actions, and 19 times the body cameras proved that the complaint was false. And so the in-car cameras will help us out more with that. The things that you can't see with a body camera, if we have officers on a traffic stop, you just don't get a good view of the whole picture. You can't see driving. You can't see pursuits. You get a great view of the steering wheel, but that's all you see. And inevitably, body cameras will fall off when we're chasing people. They've come off during fights that an officer have been involved in. And so the two of these have always been our goal, is to add them together for great coverage. And so this is a extended contract with our current body cam vendor to add in their car cameras. The $199,000 is the first year cost that includes the installation. And then the overall 5-year cost is the $833,000. So this is our biggest initiative that we're looking at for the coming year. As far as our other ads, you can kind of break them down into training and equipment. The first half in training, this accounts for $36,800 in extra training. The first one on there is the Supervisory Leadership Institute. For years, California Post has offered this class for our sergeant level supervision. I've been to this class. It is literally one of the best classes that our state puts on. They are finally opening it up to people who are not sergeants, and so they have opened it up to police dispatch supervisors, and the funding for this is $6,500 to allow our dispatch supervisors to attend. This is an 8-month program. They go once a month for 8 months for 4 days into this class. It is an exceptional leadership program, so I'm happy that it's going to expand beyond just our sergeants. The next two are kind of tied together with our defensive tactics training and our Red Dot firearm site training programs. Collectively, it's $15,000 in a request for defensive tactics and $5,300 for range. Our police department predominantly trains by sending our trainers out to outside trainers, learning everything we can there, and then bringing them back and training our entire police department. It's one of the reasons we have one of the best trained police departments in California, is because of how we do this. This is so we can continue that. The first piece is for our defensive tactics training, and the second part is for our Red Dot site firearm training. This coming year, we're going to begin a transition on all of our firearms that we issue that will have a Red Dot sight on them instead of the traditional iron sights, far more accurate, and this will cover the training costs to train our trainers. The CalNINA training is dispatch training. CalNINA oversees training and training conferences across the state. The reality, this is a wash, so we'll increase our budget by $10,000 to account for the training, but then it's all fully reimbursable by the state. So in this case, the CalNINA training additional will amount to $0 for us. And then, as you know, because I've been there with you the last couple of years, myself and another member of the police department have attended the cap-to-cap legislative advocacy back in Washington, D.C., where we push for public safety reforms and bills and things that benefit our city. The last 2 years, we've stolen that money from other places in the police budget where we didn't really have it to take it, but we figured out a way. So this year, we're actually going to try to budget for it the right way. The last part on here is equipment related. Overall, with our equipment, this is about a little over $100,000 in new equipment. The first one is $12,000 for our priority dispatch maintenance contract. This is the software program where we run our emergency medical dispatching. So when someone calls 911, there's a computer program that begins assisting the dispatcher in providing life-saving medical instructions while first responders are on the way. This is the contract to go with that. The next one down, the cell phone forensic software, our current provider is at the end of its life. And so we're looking at buying the new system. This is how we download cell phones for criminal investigations, and accounts for just shy of $12,000. The next one down is SWAT rifle uppers and sound suppressors. Our SWAT rifles have reached the end of their life cycle. I can tell you this because I was a lieutenant when I sat in one of these meetings and asked for the money for it, and that was a long time ago. And so they are now at the end of their life cycle, but we're actually not replacing the entire rifle. We're replacing parts within the rifles. And so this funding will provide that for 17 new rifles for our SWAT team members. The next one down, patrol vehicle radios. This really is to help us as we move cars in and out. Right now, what happens when we get a new car, we have to take the radio out of the car it's replacing and then go put it in the new car while the car's being built. And so what happens is there's a dead period in between where the new car's gone or the old car's gone and the new car's not here yet. This will give us 2 radios so we can make that transfer work without any downtime in our vehicles. And the next one down is for our Community Services Division. I think you're all aware we're out of space over at the Police Department, and the Electric Department's built this nice building or moved into it across the street, and they're going to allow us to use a piece of it to move our Community Services Division. And this is to pay for the computers and the monitors and all the parts and pieces of technology to help us move across the street to Grant with our Community Services Division. And the last one at $17,000 is replacing all the cameras for our Crime Scene Investigations Unit. They're the ones that go out and take pictures at all of our major crime scenes, and this is to update their cameras and equipment. So the last thing is, how does all this tie into what your goals are? Clearly, the police department fits underneath maintaining a safe and healthy community. You have some goals, sub-goals that fall under that with addressing homelessness. The position moves that I talked about in social services is directly tied to this goal. Optimizing levels of service, our community service officer addition to real-time crime is directly related to that. Our ability to impact how patrol responds to calls for service on the front end, and as well as how fast and efficient our detectives are on solving crimes on the back end, is directly tied to our real-time crime center. And then continued effort at maintaining community trust on two ends. One, training. I mentioned that our police department is exceptionally well trained. You get the kind of police department that you train for, and your community gets that kind of police department with ours, and a big piece of that is related to the training we do in building our community trust. And obviously at camera systems, it's kind of a two-way street, as I mentioned. Not only does it keep our officers accountable when everything they're doing is being recorded, it also keeps our community accountable, because like I mentioned, 19 times they said things that were not accurate. And it's very helpful for us to have those things recorded. So with that, that is our budget request coming into the new year, and I'm here for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions?
I had a question. Chief, on the in-car cameras, I know on the older vehicles, as I'm sure you're aware, with the old rack systems, a lot of the electronics were hardwired in. With these newer cameras, is it more of a plug and play, or is it directly wired in with the rest of the components? And the reason I ask is, with some of the things coming up with state regulations and having to be in compliance with vehicles and emissions and things, we're going to be swapping these cars out. Will we be able to transfer these cameras from car to car, or will it be a new expense for a new camera because some of that stuff won't transfer over to the new vehicles?
All these things will transfer, their plug and play. It's not the old system we had where you had a VCR plugged into the trunk and everything was wired in. This is not like that.
There's a lot of cables.
Yeah, there's a lot of parts and pieces. These are not, in fact, the picture that was on there, they literally stick that behind the mirror and plug it in. And so, yeah, it's not going to be, those ones we had before, if the car went down and you had to replace everything, it was a monster, and these are not like that.
So worst case, we'll lose the wiring harnesses, but the cameras themselves, we'll just put them in and just buy basically new hardware if we needed to. The camera itself, though, is transferable from car to car.
Yes, and these cameras are very similar to our body cameras, and so as we work out the contract with our vendor, they actually replace the equipment for us without cost. The cost and the way they make their money is off our data storage. And so the cameras and equipment pieces they replace for us. In fact, our body cameras replace every 30 months. We're getting ready to get to where they're going to get replaced. And it's just a natural cycle. They replace all the equipment. And it's the same vendor and the same program.
Great. Thank you very much.
Any other questions of the chief?
I have a question. Can you explain again on the outreach specialists, the ones that we have and then the ones that we get from the county? Can you just explain that dynamic? I think you hit on it a little bit.
So we have 2 outreach workers that are funded partly by Health and Human Services, partly by the city, partly by the Downtown Roseville Partnership. Everybody throws some money into the pot. And those 2 outreach workers are dedicated homeless outreach workers assigned to the police department. We have not had either of those since last summer. In fact, we haven't had both of them very much at all. The second one we lost last summer when she went back over to Health and Human Services, and we've just had trouble getting them filled because we have to work with them. It's not somebody I can go out and hire. And so what we're looking to do is kind of stabilize that a little bit, have 2 of our own, as well as the ones from Health and Human Services. There's a concern that we don't want to start doing what somebody else should be paying for. And what we're looking at is the expanded ability within the PD, because the ones from the county we can only use for homeless outreach. our social services unit deals a lot with homeless issues, but they also deal with mental health response that has absolutely nothing to do with homeless issues. And we're stuck with our outreach workers from the county. They can only do homeless outreach. By doing it ourselves, we can help with homeless outreach, but we can also hit the mental health side of it. So we're looking to do a little bit, but also be able to expand what we're doing.
So the ones with the county, did they run out of hours for the part-time, or was it just other circumstances they just?
It wasn't ours. It's trying to
Okay.
get them hired and through background checks and those kinds of things.
Is there, we're on the task force, the homeless task force together, so we have a chance, you and I have a chance to talk about these things there, but is there a discussion around not, about having them full-time, like bona fide employees? I mean, is this going to be just what happens when you hire a couple part-time people? You're going to lose them because they're going to be looking for steady employment. And have you all explored that?
So I think with us, with these two part-time positions, we're kind of looking at things as stepping stones. So we have, as you know, our social work practitioner position. We look at the outreach workers as maybe being the future social work practitioners, kind of building our bench, so to speak. There's also some folks that, for instance, one of our interns now, I don't think she wants full-time employment. I think she's really looking for the part-time. So it's kind of given us options. And then the other one is looking to see, does this work? Does it work the way we want it to? And then do we come back in future years and try to expand this into making them full-time? I just don't know that yet.
Got it, okay. Last thing I'll just add is that on your council priorities, you have maintain a safe and healthy community, but I would just say that you hit every single one of our priorities. I mean, certainly that is your primary function, but in terms of our economic development and well-planned and being fiscally responsible, you do all those things for our city. That's all.
Councilman Albert?
Back on the county issue, is there a chance that since the county can't supply the bodies we need and we can't use them for everything we want, can they maybe fund what we've already hired in a small percentage of it, since we are using them for homeless outreach as well?
It's not for lack of their effort. So it's not like they're just letting those positions sit on the side and not doing anything. It's just been difficult. And so collectively, and I think as we continue through the process we're working through on the larger county project, I think they're shifting how they want to use those workers. And so I'm okay leaving them where they're at right now, because I think they're going to change how they want to do it, and we'll still end up with the resources we need. But the reality is they've just had a hard time hiring them.
Right. And I want to preface this, I'm a huge fan of our police department. I think that is a major factor to quality of life in our city. But I do want to ask, and I know adding one police officer is very expensive, because it's not just the cop, it's the equipment and the training and the support and everything else. But how come we don't have any more traffic police? Because that is probably, I don't know about the other county, that's probably the one most complained about thing as far as police is they're not stopping speeders. And I know we are, and I know we're writing a lot of tickets and stuff, but why don't we have another body there or growing that?
Well, I think in the reality of that is that it's, our motor unit is just one piece of traffic enforcement in the city. Every single patrol officer also does traffic enforcement. And so, could we add positions there? Sure. At one point, we had a motor unit that was twice the size of what we have, but that was back in the days where those lines were crossing that you were talking about, and we were on the wrong side of the cross. So, in the future, could I see it growing in the traffic unit? Because I probably don't get as many traffic complaints as you get, but I get a lot of traffic complaints.
I'll start sharing them more often, maybe.
Yeah. I think we get plenty of them. So, it could be, but I think where we're at now, I think, the resources we have are there. I think part of it is misconception. As you know, you and I have had this conversation before. There's a lot of people who think we don't pull people over, and we pull people over constantly. And it happens all day, every day, and it's if someone doesn't see it actually happening, then it never happened, which just isn't really reality. So
Maybe pull them over and just leave them there for a while with your lights going. So, but
We're straight into council comments here, okay?
Yeah, I would love to see some growth in the traffic area, just because, again, that's such a huge complaint by the community. Anyway, thanks.
Chief, great presentation. Understood most of it, all of it? And and these guys ask the best questions, so I've got nothing. I'll open it up for public comment.
I just want to say,
Oh.
no, I really appreciate seeing the comments you have on our city Facebook sites, where you talk about how many stops you make and what you do. I think that's where you have numbers, and your community can look at those numbers that you put there and what you do, and I think that's really good, because, I know if you don't see it, you don't think it's got done, but, when you're looking at these and saying, yes, we've got a big city and what you've done, and I appreciate you mentioned the fact that just because you're not on patrol, that doesn't mean you're not on patrol. If you see something crazy, your officers are going to be taking care of it. And I'm real excited about the real-time crime center, that it's going to be expanded, and it's been real successful in really deterring crime, and what crime we have, catch it quick and take care of it, and that's been good. And I didn't know about all the social worker. I had no idea that they could only take care of homeless and not people that are mentally ill, because that's a big focus that we have in the community, that you see it occasionally, but when it happens, it's nice to have someone there that they can work on it. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm not going to form a question. I'm going to open it for public comment. And I'm going to close public comment. And I'm going to agree with my colleagues, because you are a cornerstone to economic development, to your officers when they attend, and we've talked after I've attended some neighborhood associations. They are great representatives of not only your department, but the community, in their compassion, their empathy, their knowledge of police operations. And it's a great comfort to our citizens when they have an opportunity to talk with them at things like National Night Out. So thank you.
All right.
You're dismissed.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Never dismissed a chief before.
There you go.
Dismiss one, welcome another. Good evening, Chief Partee. How are you?
Great, thank you. I'll get closer to that 3 minutes than he will.
I know there's a little friendly rivalry.
Yeah,
So.
it's all good. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Rick Partee. I'm the fire chief here for the city of Roseville, and with me I have Assistant Chief Jason Rizzi. He is also the fire marshal. I've got him doing a deep dive into the budget, learning the budget as much as he can, and working closely with our management analysts. So he's here to answer any questions along with I. All right. So as Chief Burstrom mentioned earlier, we have different divisions within each department. In our department, we have 4 divisions, which is fire administration, fire and life safety, fire operations, and support services. I was just first to say that, the men and women of Roseville Fire Department proudly serve the service in the public in all hazardous environments, capable of responding to any type of fire, EMS, rescue, or hazardous material call. We have 8 fire stations, soon to be 9, strategically located throughout the city, with paramedics staffed every single day on every apparatus. Fire and administration itself implements city policies, programs, including management of the various programs, including budget. Fire has a fantastic group of civilian support office staff that manage the non-emergent business side of the department every day, day in and day out. Fire and life safety is a big part of the department's efforts for community risk reduction, improving the safety and quality of life for the citizens of Roseville. Combined with the operations side of the house, we perform over 4,000 fire code enforcement and fire safety inspections throughout the city. The crews and inspectors themselves educate well over 4,000 students each year on fire and life safety topics. Fire operations, where the rubber meets the road, as you guys all know, responds to all hazards to meet the routine and catastrophic needs of our community, whether those be medical calls, fire calls, technical rescue, hazardous materials, and other type of emergency calls. Last year, Roseville Fire responded to over 19,000 calls for service in the last year. That's up well over 1,000 calls from the year prior. And in the training division here, it provides tracks training for all of our members of the department to ensure that the firefighters maintain certifications, proficiency, and whether they're at the fire training center or whether they're doing it in-house. And of course, our fire services, support services division provides all the logistical, purchasing, station facilities, management support for the business side of the house for the fire department. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about our new positions. All right, operating expenditures. As you can see, our budget this year will be at $45.3 million. That's up a little bit from the 45.2. 45.2 of that is in the general fund itself. Makes up about 21% of the general fund operating budget, as mentioned earlier by Dennis. It's also good to note that 21% of the fire's general fund expenditures covered by revenue offsets. As with the other city departments, fire is a service-driven department, so that big 83% there is the people, made up of people who provide the service that we do. Currently, we have 120 authorized positions within the fire department. When this budget is approved, hopefully it's approved, we'll go up to 130, which I'll talk about that here in a little bit with the new positions we're going to be adding. As you can see, 83% of fire's budget is in operation where the work is done. I mentioned that earlier, but that's for the calls of service that our citizens call us for. The next largest piece of the pie is the materials and supplies needed to perform those duties in the support services. And the services provided by the Fire and Life Safety Division, I should note, in code enforcement, involves fees for service with revenue offsets that covers the bulk of its cost. All right. Budget highlights for fire. Well, this is fire's year, with the fact that we're building Fire Station 9, Fire Station 8, I should say, our 9th fire station over here off of Blue Oaks in Wood Creek area. We'll be hiring 9 firefighters to make up the Fire Engine 8 with 3 captains, 3 engineers, and 3 firefighter paramedics to make up that station. That's where the bulk of our positions and costs will come from this next year. We're also adding, as they mentioned earlier, a 10th position, which is a fire captain. I've been asking for this for probably about the last 7 years or so. Actually, Councilman Albert, you always made me sweat talking about those prior years of the crossing when we were asking for having to make some cuts, which brought us down to that 120 during that time. But this position here, this is a 40-hour captain position on staff to help us maintain that training and certification and credentialing that we need, and after-action reports of significant incidents, but also take over some logistical facilities, fleet, and equipment maintenance pieces that my chief officers are having to be able to do that he can hone in on and really get a deep dive into those and make sure those get taken care of on a regular basis instead of every once in a while. Several areas that need training. So the training piece is a really big piece that he's going to be able to take up for us and make that work for us. With that, as you can see, talk about council goals a little bit. You know, the department will continue to work to optimize its levels of service in order to maintain a safe and healthy community, which ensures the public safety service through the well are maintained as the city grows. Through agreements with the community colleges I'm looking at and the local universities and the California Specialized Training Institute, the department is focusing on partnerships in the higher education to provide educational opportunities for all in public safety, which includes the citizens who want to become firefighters possibly and get into public safety. The department continually works on enhancing the use of technology and data and improve operations. For example, in this year's budget, or by the time this year is over, we'll be adding with the work with IT, updating our fire station alerting system that enhances our ability to receive notifications of incidents and get us out the door faster, decreasing our response times. Also, the department is working to invest in aging infrastructure and plan for the future growth, utilizing analytical data and performance matrix to drive decision-making related to facility needs and improve operational capabilities and response. Maintain our ability to deliver exceptional city services. As you know, we're growing in the west side, and that's the area that it's time for us to take a look at. And with the building of Fire Station 8, we'll have that opportunity to free up Engines 9, Engine 5, Engine 7, who have been covering that district now, and take a look how they respond over there in the southwest side of the city and see how the city grows. With that, that's all I really had to say for right now for the fire department. Any questions?
Councilwoman Rakucci, any questions?
No, thank you for the report. It's looking real nice to have the new station coming on and the new police officers, firefighters. It's good.
Councilmember Mendoza?
Quick question for you, Chief. I know that I've talked to Dom, and I think I've talked to you once or twice over the last couple of months with supply chain issues and things related to Fire Station 8 and the equipment being allocated to that. Have we already paid for the trucks for that station? Do we have a deposit down? Was that in last year's budget, or is that carrying over to this year's budget? And is that reflected in these numbers?
So yes, we thank you to Dom and Dennis and those who found, you guys found it in the budget here a year or so ago to pay for those trucks up front. Right now, I just actually got a text before I walked up here. The build out on those is going close to 42 to 48 months. Actually, we won't even make it to the board for the build at the end of this year. So they're already paid for, and we haven't had any price increases that I know of come our way.
There's no additional cost expected. What we paid out of that for last year, we're good to go once hopefully when they're delivered, whenever that might be.
Yeah, not that I know of.
Yeah, thank you, Chief.
I just want to add quickly to that, if I can. That won't delay the opening and operation of the station, though. We're going to use reserve trucks until we get our new trucks in operation.
Councilman Albert?
Yeah, just a couple questions. One is, most of our community seems to understand it, but a few get stressed about the first responder fee that we had implemented years ago to help reimburse or offset some of the expenses. Do we have any figures for that? Sorry, I know it's not on any of the slides, but how are we doing on the first responder fee, and what is it offsetting in our budget?
Councilmember Albert, I think the fee is coming in as expected in terms of the revenue projected by finance and our consultant. It's actually been a little better than anticipated. We're going to see some growth next year, and that does offset all of the medical supplies, all the different training requirements. To run an ALS program is very, very expensive, and there's a lot of equipment. Just for example, our life packs are between $30,000 and $40,000 a copy on each one of those engines. So there's a lot of expenses that go with it, and as you mentioned, that's where the money is used to offset those.
And then the other thing is on the pie chart that we have, it's a huge thing for fire operations. And I know we have, I think that includes equipment and staffing lumped together. I would personally, in the future, would love to see those split up, because I know we have some very expensive equipment in our fire department. We've got to maintain that. And I know, staffing's not cheap either, but it would be nice to break those apart like we've seen in some other.
Correct. So if you look at the support services, that's where most of the equipment and the stuff-related items are. Of our budget, it's probably only about $3 to $4 million total on material supplies and services, everything from utilities to turnouts to hose. So the vast majority of our cost in the fire department is personnel cost.
So that is mostly personnel then?
Yes, sir.
So not the new fire trucks and stuff like that?
No, they are not included in that at all.
Okay, thanks.
Vice Mayor Bernasconi?
Just it's an exciting year for the fire department and for our community. I don't live far, many of us don't live far from where Station 8 will be, and it'll just be fantastic to have those services so close to a community that's still growing in that area. You wouldn't think it would still be growing, but after 20 years, we're finally getting some things out there. So we're really happy about the new staffing and the new station and everything else that you all do for the community. We appreciate your work.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we're very excited about it too, because it will actually free up those trucks and other units for other areas that need the same response.
Great, I don't have any questions. I'll open it for public comment. Close public comment, unless there are any other council comments. I do very much appreciate, like my colleagues, the work you do every day, and I know we get from time to time someone, as a matter of fact, I picked up a letter today about, the advanced life support first responder fee. I'll get it to you guys, and, I know that you've been very responsive to people who have special circumstances and inability to pay, so really appreciate that, so thank you.
Great, thank you.
Next up, Parks, Rec, and Library, and our Director, Jill Geller. G.
That's right. Good afternoon, Mayor Howell Shelton, members of the council. I am Jill Geller, your Parks, Recreation, and Libraries Director, and it's my pleasure to present to you our proposed FY24 budget for the Parks, Recreation, and Libraries Department. I want to thank Tara G., our Park Project and Development Manager, for being here today because we know there's often questions about park
You
development.
scared me. You know, when you thank her, I worry that she's going to retire. So please.
Don't worry about that.
She's never leaving, she says.
And I also want to thank Julie Sparks, our administration manager, and Randy Hodge, who are here today, our management analysts, because they did a lot of hard work putting this budget together. So thank you all. So as you're aware, the Parks, Recreation, and Libraries Department oversees all of the city's parks and open space, recreation programs and facilities, libraries, and museum. You can see the divisions on this slide, but we also manage, and that says 81 developed parks, but as you know, that changes almost daily. So right now, we're managing 85 developed parks. We have not had dedications for all those yet, and you will get some of those in the coming months, and nearly 4,000 acres of open space. Additionally, we maintain more than 300 acres of streetscapes, 43 acres of school properties, and 40 miles of multi-use trails. We also manage and maintain more than 30 facilities. These include our 3 libraries, 3 swimming pools, 2 golf courses, the Mahaney Fitness Center and Maidu Community Center, the museum and historic site, and with the opening of 2 new schools this fall, we will have a total of 21 Adventure Club sites. PRL's proposed general fund operating budget for FY24 is $47.4 million. This consists of the numerous areas and operations you see on this pie chart, with the largest percentage being taking care of our parks and open space at 36% of our budget. Not all of PRL's operating budget comes from the general fund. You can see that the Youth Development Fund and Golf Fund are also included in PRL's budget. Our total general fund operating budget is $35 million, which is 16% of the city's overall general fund operating budget. And 29% of our expenditures are covered by revenue offsets. This slide shows our new position recommendations for FY24, and first on the list is a Parks Manager. The Parks Division is our department's largest division, employing 60 full-time staff and 30 part-time staff, and with a budget in excess of $20 million. You might be surprised to know that there is currently no manager position over this division. So the addition of this Parks Manager position, especially with our continued growth, will absolutely increase our efficiencies and provide more effective leadership over this huge division. And because this position will help oversee maintenance activities in the city's CFDs, part of the position's fundings will come from CFD administration fees. The management analyst is a much-needed position within our PRL administration division. It will fill gaps that were identified in our strategic master plan, recognizing that our department's funding is complex as we monitor and forecast our revenues and expenses in the general fund, in 38 CFDs and LLDs, the Youth Development's Enterprise Fund, the Golf Fund, and several other funds. And as you know, the funding for park development alone is quite complex, so this position will assist in that area as well. We heard through the strategic master planning process a large desire for more cultural arts opportunities in the city, and a cultural arts supervisor will help meet this need. Responsibilities for this position will include oversight of the Maidu Museum and Historic Site, which is such a valuable cultural asset to our city. Additionally, the supervisor will work closely with Blue Line Arts, Roseville Historical Society, and other arts and culture providers in the city to develop a more comprehensive citywide cultural effort. And the supervisor will participate in a visioning plan for the Fitment House to expedite its opening, and will develop programming to generate revenues at this site. We all know that public art is important. It helps form a community's identity, and this position will help coordinate the creation and placement of more public art in Roseville, along with a signature arts and culture event, which would be another feather in Roseville's cap. Program revenues will assist with the funding of the cultural arts supervisor position. Next are the parks maintenance workers. The safety of our parks is priority 1, and their cleanliness and appearance is the first thing that our residents see. We have historically employed part-time staff to porter our parks, but it has become increasingly difficult to find part-time staff. And when we do hire them, the turnover rate is high. So we're reducing our temporary salaries, plus reallocating another full-time position to fund these 3 full-time park maintenance workers who will provide consistency and efficiency in keeping our parks safe, clean, and green. 3 natural resource workers will help maintain the additional open space acres and the additional trail miles that we acquire each year, as well as assist our efforts to control encroachment, invasive species, homeless encampments, and to maintain our creeks. We're reducing temporary salaries to fund these 3 full-time positions as well, knowing that we'll see much greater efficiencies with full-time staff in these roles. The addition of these positions will advance the council's goals to maintain a safe and healthy community, to remain fiscally responsible, invest in well-planned infrastructure and growth, and deliver exceptional city services. Our other FY24 requests and initiatives are aligned to meet the council's goals as well. To maintain a safe and healthy community, we are including additional funds for downtown library security for our increased open hours and a mobile security camera that we can place at park construction sites or at other locations as needs arise. And our budget also includes funding for vandalism repair and graffiti abatement to ensure that our parks are safe for our visitors. To deliver exceptional city services, we've included funding to add to our library collection, which was a recommendation of our strategic master plan due to requests from our residents. We've included audiovisual upgrades at the Maidu Community Center and Riley meeting rooms, making those more desirable spaces. And we've added expenses for our department to begin the national accreditation application process. To support community engagement, we'll be enlisting a consultant to assist with a much-needed marketing and public relations plan. This plan was also a recommendation of our strategic master plan, and it is a requirement for agency accreditation. To invest in well-planned infrastructure and growth, we've added funds for maintenance of new parks, which includes Apollo Dog Park, Denio Family Park, and the courts at Gibson Park, and funds to take care of our aging parks. Park amenity replacement funds will help our aging small park amenities such as benches, picnic tables, drinking fountains, shade structures, and so on. To enhance economic vitality, we have various arts programs and projects, including more public art, as I mentioned, downtown, at Veterans Park North, and at the soccer complex, and increased partnership support for Blue Line Arts and Performing Arts of Roseville. In conclusion, I know I say it often, but you know that I believe it, that parks make life better. Our residents believe it too. You'll recall that we learned through our strategic master plan, public engagement, that residents appreciate our services and they just want us to provide more. 88% of our residents agree that PRL improves their physical health and wellness, and 87% agree that PRL improves their mental health. And 89% of residents agree that PRL makes Roseville a more desirable place to live. We're proud to once again be a National Gold Medal finalist, one of the top 4 agencies in the nation, serving communities with populations between 150,000 and 400,000. And lastly, we're pleased to present a responsible budget that allows us to continue providing the valuable parks, recreation, and library services that our residents love so much and that improve our quality of life here in Roseville. But none of the work would be possible without our great city leadership and without your support. So on behalf of all of the staff at Parks, Recreation, and Libraries, thank you very much for your continued support, and we'll stand for any questions you might have.
Councilman Albert, any questions?
I don't have any questions.
Vice Mayor Bernasconi?
Well, I have to ask something. I think that your strategy is right on. The other 13 or 12 or 11% that are in the graph are just flat out wrong or not reading their survey, because I would believe that 100% of our residents believe that what you do makes our city better. This is a little off topic, but you know I'm on the trails a lot and early, and I know that for a while you were doing some beta testing of the automatic locks. Can you tell me real quick on an update on those, and is that ever going to be part of like the full time to implement them everywhere?
The automatic restroom locks?
Yes, sorry, thank you.
We are still testing them. You know, the plan was to implement them everywhere. I think technology hasn't necessarily caught up with us yet because we do see some glitches in them, but we continue to investigate that and look to do that in the future.
I love them.
Okay, good. That's good to know. Thank you.
And they work, the ones I go to work, you know, around Veterans Park and that sort of thing. But, you know, when you need to use a restroom and you're on a trail and somewhere, so that's all. Thank you for what you all do.
Thank you.
Councilmember Riccucci?
Maybe just an update on Weber Park. Where are we at with Weber Park?
Weber Park, we have taken the master plan to Parks Commission, and we're in the process of developing the CEQA process concurrent with the construction document. So we expect to bring that master plan and the CEQA document this fall, later this year, to the council for approval. And the good thing about that is because it's a detailed CEQA document, we'll have full set of plans to go along with it. So our plan is still to break ground in the spring of 2024.
Thank you.
Councilman Mendoza?
Great presentation, Jill. I love the mobile security camera purchase. I think that's long overdue. And I never tire seeing this national gold medal finalist medallion. I just love it.
That's nice.
Great presentation. Thank you.
So embedded in here, planning for parks is tricky business, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Tara will know where I'm going with this. Planning for parking at parks is tricky business. Do you have any, in the master plan or in here, do you have any, you know, any visions or ideas to assist where we have established parks that are experiencing the growing pains of success?
I think you're talking about one park in particular,
might be.
up in the Stone Ridge area. And the challenge is that the space, if we were to put more parking in there, we would have to take away an amenity. The other challenge is that if, with the current challenges we have with the parking lot itself, there's some late night activity, and by expanding the parking lot, we just give a greater venue for that kind of activity. So it is a dilemma. We tried the best we can. We have expanded the parking lot 3 times larger than what it was before, plus opened up 100 spaces along Scarborough Drive. So we continue to look at it. I was there this weekend, and it was really great to see everybody enjoying it in a very positive way. So we'll continue to explore what that means as time goes by.
And with new parks, you continue to do the outreach to new parks and get the communities, and with rehabilitation as well?
Yes, we do. One of the things that not every park will require a parking lot. So those, when we look at neighborhood parks with an hour to an hour and a half stay and play value, usually there's not a parking lot. But when we start putting in those fields where people are staying, that's where you see the restrooms and the parking lots associated with school parking lots as well. So to the extent we can use school parking lots, that's what we try to do, and expand it a little bit more.
And I was thinking beyond, so when you go in to refurbish a park, you
Yep.
do outreach to the community to see what their interest is in the park, because parks change. They have a
Yes.
natural life cycle of when they were first there to 30 years later, right?
Yeah, case in point is Weber Park. We did an extensive 2-year outreach program, partnered with the Health Education Council as well as the Neighborhood Association to reach out to the neighbors and the residents through surveys and attendance at different events to get all their feedback. So we'll continue to do that. We really believe in public outreach as being a key component of park planning.
You know, and I do call them growing pains because, as you know, from the night we were at Stone Ridge, the gentleman who was the most outspoken about parking also said, "I love this city." So it's not for criticism. It is, they're very constructive. So anyway, I bled into comments there. We'll open it for public comments, close public comments, and bring it back to the council. And thank you for your report.
Thank you.
From Mr. Isom on Development Services.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Mike Eismer, Development Services Director, and thank you for the opportunity to present the Development Services Department's budget for fiscal '24. We have 6 budgeted divisions, but in reality, we have 4 functional divisions comprised of 86 employees of various development disciplines. The functional areas are on the screen, but our Building, Permit Center, and Code Enforcement Division, they review plans, they inspect buildings, they manage the Permit Center, which is the city's one-stop shop for development permits. And Code Enforcement, as you know, is responsible for community-wide nuisance abatement and blight abatement. They do sign enforcement, and as of this current fiscal year, manage now the city's graffiti abatement response program, which has been very successful so far. Our Business and Administrative Services Unit, they are kind of the internal support division for the divisions within Development Services. They provide organizational, technological, administrative support. They manage our citywide permitting system, which is Acela Automation. That is a huge task. It's used by at least a half a dozen or more departments citywide. They manage our development data and records. They manage also the citywide addressing, so 911 system, utility billing system, all rely on the addressing that's managed by that unit. They also, most importantly, manage our project billings, which brings in over $4 million in revenue in the form of secondary labor every year. Engineering land development, they review infrastructure improvement plans. They inspect all topside and underground improvements as it's built. So in new growth areas, they're out there watching the pipes go on the ground, making sure that they're constructed properly to minimize the city's future maintenance costs. The same with the roads, anything above ground. They also maintain the citywide traffic modeling program and the traffic impact fee programs, which total over $500 million. And lastly, they provide staff support to the South Placer Regional Transportation Authority. And then last but not least, the Planning Division oversees the city's land use planning and general plan. They manage the zoning ordinance, they process development entitlements, and they also participate in regional planning efforts with partners such as SACOG and other regional entities. Planning, as of 2018, also provides citywide environmental coordination services. So the environmental coordinator resides within our department. They consult with all city departments on environmental needs. They consult with and liaison, if you will, with the various state and federal resource agencies. They secure federal and state resource permits, such as wetland fills and things like that. It's very important work. And helps make sure the city stays in the good graces of the resource agencies, which we very much want to be in. So for fiscal year '24, it's for the most part a status quo budget for us. Nothing as exciting as what you've heard from anybody else so far. Quite boring, in fact. But excluding the impact fee funds that we control, our total operating budget is right around $12.6 million. Within that number is about $640,000 for technology-related expenses. This comes out of our technology-specific technology fee fund, or our development-specific technology fee fund, I should say. So these are technology platforms that serve development and the customers that we serve. So things like Acela Automation, which I mentioned earlier, the permitting system, electronic plan check. It helps support license costs for that, upgrades as needed, and then the various consultant costs to help maintain those systems. So our true general fund operating budget is just under $12 million. It's broken down in the categories on the screen. Similar to what you've heard tonight, we are primarily a people-driven organization, so the majority of our costs are personnel expenses, wages, benefits, salaries, or personnel costs. So what's important to know, though, is that the net number, that general fund cost, is offset by about $3.4 million in staff time reimbursement for full cost projects. So we, especially planning and engineering, work on development projects that we bill on a time and materials basis, so we recover that. That $3.4 million is reflected as an offset to our expenditures, so it's not reflected as revenue. But what is reflected as revenue is another $5.8 million in permit fees, so building permit fees that come in and other miscellaneous permit fees. So between the reimbursements for full costs and the permit fees, we bring in about 9.2, or projecting next year to bring in 9.2 million in various forms of cost recovery. So the overall resulting net impact of the general fund is budgeted for next year at $2.8 million. So of that 12.6, the net impact is only 2.8, and that's only 1.3% of the total general fund operating budget. So we're proud of the amount that we're able to recover in costs for our services. And in fact, through April of this year, we're trending at about 76% cost recovery. So we expect that to hold to the end of the year. So that the resulting general fund cost is reflected in services that we generally can't recover costs from, or it really shouldn't recover costs from. Things like answering questions at the front counter, code enforcement, regional coordination, going to neighborhood meetings, and doing outreach efforts like that. That's what those costs are really reflected as, just kind of those general government functions. So again, as I mentioned, status quo, pretty boring. We will see expenses increase next year by just over $500,000 in three primary areas, two of which are completely beyond our control. The first is the increases in IT and facilities internal services funds. Those rates are set above my pay grade, and I really have very little, if no, influence over those. The second is increases resulting from the labor market adjustments. So salary costs have gone up in our department, consistent with the market. The third area that we do have control over is a $50,000 contract for environmental consulting. This is to help us bridge the gap. As most or all of you know, Terry Sherhall, our previous environmental coordinator, retired this past year. So in an effort to bridge that gap, we've retained an environmental consulting firm that has institutional knowledge with Roseville that's going to help us get the new person. Jessica Lynch, one of our associate planners, has been promoted into that position. So that will help get her up to speed and provide a resource to her as she needs it. Let's see. So much of that cost, by the way, is we expect to be offset through various full cost billing, either to utilities, capital improvement projects, things like that. So the net general fund hit certainly less than $50,000. And then, of course, the expenses in the tech fund are always offset 100% by permit fee revenues, so that won't hit the general fund either. As far as position requests, we are asking to convert an existing limited-term development technician into a regular permanent full-time position. As we continue to grow, this position is necessary to keep up with the levels of customer service that our customers have come to expect, really to provide front counter support and to deal with the mountain of encroachment permits we continue to see for especially dry utility work in the rights of way. Fiber optic cable is real big right now, so we have guys in the field 24 hours a day watching that stuff. So that'll help us deal with those permits. And again, like most of the other work engineering does, most of that work is cost recoverable, so it's billable on a time and materials basis. Approval of this position does align with the council goal of delivering exceptional city services. And of course, most of what we do translates back to well-planned infrastructure and growth. You can tie most of our services back to that. If you had asked me earlier in the year what I thought this upcoming fiscal year would look like in terms of development activity, my answer would be vastly different from what it is now. We're projecting it to be a lot slower. In fact, probably half the volume that we now expect to see next year. So we expect another busy year, certainly not as busy as that time period between 2020 and 2022. That was just abnormally busy, but it's going to be normal or above, slightly above normal this upcoming fiscal year, which we're happy about. And as always, we look forward to the challenge. With that, I conclude Development Services presentation. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Great. Councilwoman Rakucci, any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Councilmember Mendoza, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Councilmember Albert?
Just quick comment. I can't say how many times I hear every year developers and businesses that have had businesses in other areas, this isn't their first, saying, man, Roseville's so much different than other places. They're so easy to work with in comparison to, some other place. And a vast majority of other places they're mentioning too. And so I think you guys do a great job there, and thank you for being wonderful to work with for our outside businesses and developers.
Yeah, what Scott's saying is 100% true. I heard it all the time when I was on the Planning Commission, and I thought maybe that was a line that you gave the applicant when they were at the... But it isn't. In fact, we were at an event last week for a groundbreaking, and the ownership group, all four of them, just really sang the praises of your department and staff and just how much the city stands out in other regions that they do business. So excellent job.
Thank you.
Yep, I concur. So there's going to be a question in here. the budget is loaded with information and metrics. And I'm going to use development services as an example. And my question is this cost recoverable? So in code enforcement, when you conducted the 3,899 inspections, some of those may be cost recoverable, or?
Well, I'll give you, the answer to that is no. The vast majority is not. And I have the current fiscal year number. So we responded to over 2,200 complaints so far this year, as of yesterday, from the beginning of the fiscal year. We issued 41 citations. Our code enforcement division is geared towards compliance. We want to gain compliance and fix the problem versus just issue citations. So we typically try not to issue citations if we can gain compliance.
Great. I mean, I just wanted to highlight the detail that's in this budget and make sure I understood what was cost recovery, because you can't. So anyway, all right, I'll open up for public comment. Close public comment. Unless there's any other comments from the council, we'll move to Jason Tchaikovsky. Thank you for your report, Mr. Eisen.
That personal. Good evening, Mayor Howdy Shelton, members of the council. My name is Jason Tchaikovsky, and I am honored to be your Public Works Director. It's my pleasure to present to you tonight some highlights of the fiscal year 24 Public Works operating budget. First, to set some context for Public Works budget, I think an overview of the breadth of divisions and services provided by Public Works is helpful. We have 124 full-time staff and a couple dozen part-time temps that are divided into 6 divisions responsible for a wide variety of services. Public Works Administration provides review, oversight, and direction and coordination for the department. Engineering oversees the design and construction of roads, bridges, bike trails, traffic signals, and road resurfacing. They protect our community through management of the city's floodplain and early flood warning alert system. They manage the flow of traffic throughout the city using their varied intelligent transportation system tools. They review requests for crosswalks, stop signs, and permit parking through their traffic study program, and they maintain the city's traffic signals, intelligent transportation system, and underground fiber network. The Street Maintenance Division keeps our city roads and drainage systems in top shape. They seal the cracks in our roads, and they remove and repave portions of our failing streets. They fill potholes, sweep the city streets, install and replace traffic signs and pavement markings, complete traffic study improvements like adding crosswalks and stop signs. They plan and provide traffic control at scheduled community events and during unexpected emergencies. They clear our streets of leaves every fall. The Alternative Transportation Division owns and manages the city's bus system. They operate the South Placer Transit Information Center, where riders can make Aero reservations, that's our new microtransit dial-a-ride system, and get help with planning their transit trips throughout most of Placer County, including on other transit systems. As one of the leaders of the City Trails team, they provide oversight and planning for bike and pedestrian facilities. They implement the city's transportation system management ordinance, working to reduce single-occupancy vehicle travel on our roads through encouraging biking, ride-sharing, bus and rail, and telecommuting at the city's larger places of employment. They work with our schools to encourage walking and biking to class through creating and identifying safe routes for students to get to and from school. And they oversee the training and locations of the city's crossing guard program. The Fleet Services Division purchases, manages, and maintains the city's 900-plus vehicle fleet, which includes everything from riding lawnmowers and generators to motorcycles and police cars and buses and garbage trucks. And the Facility Services Division maintains and cleans all city-owned buildings and structures, from city fire stations to our parking garages. They manage the planning and design and construction of city buildings and parking structures and oversee facility improvements ranging from painting to remodels. So with that, the proposed Public Works operating budget for fiscal year 24 totals $60.8 million, of which only $10.5 million is from the general fund. This includes a $200,000 increase in general fund budget requested for this fiscal year, but an overall budget decrease of 4.9% from last year's budget. As you can see, the largest piece of the pie is fleet services. Fleet services is funded through an internal service fund, or ISF. The ISF is funded by the departments and divisions using their services, including fuel, vehicle maintenance, and a very expensive piece of that is vehicle replacement. Alternative transportation and street maintenance tie with the second largest budgets. Much of alternative transportation belongs to transit-related costs. But the entire pie slice is funded with state sales and gas taxes, and they do not use general fund. Street maintenance, on the other hand, has the largest general fund costs for public works. However, their slice of the pie also includes non-general fund sources of funding like utility impact reimbursements from environmental utilities for their impact to our roads, roadway safety funds, and some state gas tax for roadway maintenance. Next is facility services. Facilities is another ISF-funded division similar to fleet where customers pay for maintenance, cleaning, and improvements to their offices or work area. And engineering uses a mix of general fund and CIP secondary labor, as well as Roseville Electric funding for signal maintenance. And finally, administration is a small 3-person team, and our budget barely shows up on this pie graph and includes funding from all the previously mentioned sources. So similar to last year, the primary driver of the Public Works budget highlights for fiscal year 24 is growth. Growth of the city leads to an increase in the number of assets to maintain and the number of calls for service. And while less than with previous years, the budget is continuing to respond to another type of growth, the growth in material and contract costs due to inflation. So quickly going through the budget highlight list for this next fiscal year, we have a small increase in general fund due to cost increases for herbicide, asphalt, concrete, dump fees, and flood alert equipment maintenance necessary to provide exceptional city services. We have a $192,000 general fund request for an additional traffic engineer to keep up with the continued growth of the city. This request falls under the strategic plan goal of a safe and healthy community. We have a $122,000 general fund cost request to hire a new street maintenance worker, a service worker, who will quickly handle the growth-induced increases in miscellaneous calls for service like graffiti, potholes, and illegal dumping, keeping our community safe and healthy. A non-general fund office assistant is being requested to keep up with the ever-increasing building maintenance and custodial work orders, contracts, materials ordering, and asset tracking. As Roseville grows, the number of city staff and the portfolio of city facilities increases, leading to more work for facility services, requiring additional office assistants in order to remain fiscally responsible. A non-general fund senior custodian is required for similar reasons as the office assistant, growth of the city organization. Custodial services contribute directly to providing a safe and healthy community. With the increase in population and the number of schools, we are requesting 2 additional part-time crossing guards to help keep our students safe as they walk to and from school. These positions are funded by the state's portion of the sales tax. There's no general fund involved. And to provide customers with the best transit experience possible and thereby encourage ridership, we will continue piloting the Aero Microtransit bus service through next fiscal year. This service is also funded by the state portion of the sales tax, not with the city's portion of sales tax. With a similar theme of encouraging bus ridership and reducing congestion and providing exceptional city services, the Rapid Link Express bus service will begin in the spring of this fiscal year. The goal of the project is to provide a quick, limited stop, frequent service bus ride from just a few locations in Lincoln and Roseville down to the light rail station at Watt and I-80. The 3-year pilot project is funded through a regional partnership with all of South Placer's local governments. So it's not strictly a Roseville-funded item.
Jason, can you just?
Yes.
That bears some emphasis. It will start in Lincoln.
It'll start in Lincoln. And it'll go to the Galleria Mall, then it'll go to our 2 hospitals, and then it'll go down to I-80. There'll be 30 minutes between buses in both directions all day long. So it's our first true express service.
Yep. Thank you.
Good.
Under the goal of a well-planned infrastructure and growth, this next fiscal year we will see a federally funded study to understand the public transit needs of our community. and using that knowledge, work with the community to re-envision the future of Roseville Transit. What we have now is a vision from the past. This process will help us to understand what we need it to look like in the future to best serve our public. Fleet electrification will continue to be a big issue and a big cost. The Air Resources Board Advanced Clean Fleet Rule is official, and the city will need to start moving towards an all-zero-emission fleet. This means continuing to purchase proven battery electric buses and cars while investigating the electrification of pickups and heavy vehicles, either by battery or hydrogen power, and the installation of infrastructure to fuel those vehicles. An important note on the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule is there are some exceptions, and we're currently going through all those. My fleet manager is looking at what that means for the city. There's exceptions for emergency vehicles and vehicles that respond to emergencies, like utility trucks for Roseville Electric. So we're trying to get that all worked out. And the final item I want to highlight tonight is the $47 million in Public Works CIPs receiving funding in this budget. These projects include everything from building bridges and widening roads to maintaining our streets and storm drains. And while these projects fall under many council goals, probably the largest budgets go towards ensuring well-planned infrastructure and growth. So that concludes my overview of the proposed fiscal year 24 budget, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Councilman Howard, any questions?
I don't have any questions.
Mayor Bernasconi?
Don't have any questions.
All right, Councilwoman Riccucci?
Just one, Jason, I think you mentioned it before. One of the biggest things that you really do are maintaining our roads all over Roseville, and then the infrastructure that we need to take care of at the same time. Give me a timeline for Main Street, only because Main Street goes from Washington Boulevard to really like Foothills Boulevard. And it's, you know, it's like many other roads in Roseville that it needs some repair, but, you know, what's its timeline?
So currently we have some high priority projects that we're still trying to finish up with Los Cerritos and Roseville Heights and the Del Webb areas. So a lot of our money is going towards that. We're working on a 5-year plan for what happens next, and that's currently being developed by Chris Temez, our new streets maintenance manager. He hopes to have that to me in the next couple of months. However, I did have him pull together a list of some of the highest priority needs for resurfacing in the city, and that included Main Street. The list totaled $11.5 million of high priority projects. To do Main Street alone is $4.7 million. So it's just under half of the money of all the high priority projects. So it's a really big project. We typically bring in about $6 million a year for doing resurfacing. So it would eat up a very large piece. That means we really need to take a look at the whole picture and figure out which roads need it first and that we can afford. We try to optimize our funding so we can get the most done for the city to keep our roads in good shape with the money we have. And that includes keeping good roads good and also getting to some roads that are falling apart and we need to pick up. They're just very expensive, so we have to be very strategic. I know he's looking at that street. I don't have a timeline for you at this point.
No, I thank you for the input. It's just that street connects. It is, it was called Main Street for a reason. It's like goes through everything. And actually it's between Los Cerritos and Roseville Heights. But I think the concern is it goes so much further. But I do understand it's not the only street. And there's a lot of them who look just the same way. But just want to keep that on your radar.
Councilmember Mendoza?
No questions, Mayor.
So I just want to make sure I heard right. You have a $62.5 million budget?
Yes, 60.5.
60.5?
Yeah.
But only 10 million of it's from the general fund?
That is correct.
So we're getting our gas tax money back and all kinds of other...
A lot of money for transit. Transit is an enterprise-funded division, and so they get millions of dollars in Transportation Development Act money, which is state sales tax.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to point out. And I do appreciate your support on the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency that you staff. Okay, we'll open it for public comment. And we'll close public comment. And we'll bring it back and... Unless Anything else? Change chairs. And we'll hear from our Economic Development Department, where we all have lots of questions.
The best for last. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Melissa Anguiano, your city's Economic Development Director. I'm joined tonight by Tricia Isom, our city's Housing Manager, and we are pleased to be here to present our fiscal year 2023-24 Economic Development Department budget. The Economic Development Department is comprised of two divisions, Economic Development and Housing, which includes the federally funded Housing Authority. Economic Development's primary role is to foster a dynamic environment that supports business growth, attracts private investment, and delivers housing options in ways that enhance community vitality. Our Economic Development Division focuses on strengthening Roseville's position as a community of choice for business, investment, and lifestyle by retaining, attracting, and growing businesses, encouraging job growth and investment in the city, leveraging local and regional partnerships, and building on Roseville's competitive advantages. The division also provides staffing and support for the city's Economic Development Advisory Committee. The Housing Division manages programs including our Housing Choice Voucher Program, Community Development Block Grant Program, Affordable Purchase and Development, and Owner-Occupied Rehab programs that strive to increase the city's affordable housing availability. The division provides staffing and support for the Roseville Housing Authority, the Homeless Response Team, the Successor Agency, the Housing Successor, and the Grants Advisory Commission. The Economic Development operating budget is at $5.2 million. Of that, a little over $913,000 is general fund. We make up less than 1% of the general fund operating budget, and less than 2% of the general fund expenditures are covered by revenue offset. This does include non-general fund funding from the state and federal government, which includes our CDBG program, our home funds, Cal Home, our federal stimulus reserve ARPA funding, our housing trust funds, and our citizen benefits fund. Not included in this pie chart is the Housing Authority's $9.1 million budget, which I will go over in the next slide. The Housing Authority budget represents a significant amount of the work our Housing Division undertakes, and as noted on the previous slide, almost doubles our operating budget. The budget this year at $9.1 million is up over $1.5 million from last year's $7.6 million budget. This budget funds all of our Housing Choice Voucher programs, including the Veterans Affairs Support Housing, Main Street, and emergency housing vouchers. Our Housing Authority budget funds primarily increased due to our Housing Choice Voucher increase of a little over $850,000, but overall we received a 19% increase in our Housing Authority budget. Budget highlights for our department are minimal. This year, we are asking for a conversion of a limited term position of a housing analyst to a permanent full-time. A couple of years ago, we requested a limited term position because of an increase in workload due to homelessness and housing programs. While that position is coming up to term, the workload has not gone away. In fact, it's increased, and so we are looking to convert that position into a full-time position. We do anticipate and estimate that approximately 70% of that position can be funded with state and federal funds, with the remainder 30% being picked up by the general fund. While we have minimal changes to our operating budget this year, we did want to highlight a few significant revenue and funding impacts and efforts that will continue to support council goals and priorities. Our economic development strategy is well underway. In this last year, we opened up the Roseville Venture Lab. We installed it and have seen the operation of our digital billboards in place, bringing in so far a little over $700,000. And we launched the TPM program with our Roseville Area Chamber. We will continue to look at attracting services and amenities to support the development of sports tourism. We want to see an increase in that Measure C funding that's coming to the city. And we'll continue to promote conditions for continued growth. The baseline marketplace and the Bosch announcements are certainly great examples that exemplify the rewards and the benefits our city can reap when we do focus on supporting those conditions. The commercial corridor programming we know is a significant priority for the council, and we will continue to pursue opportunities that I will go over in the next slide. And we know our small businesses make a significant contribution to our local economy, and we want to ensure that we continue to support the conditions that allow them to grow and be vibrant. Under maintaining a safe and healthy community, we will continue to look at opportunities to continue supporting affordable housing development. We did receive a state grant match of $3.9 million last year, and we suspect that we will receive the standard agreement for that funding in this year and be able to disperse that. We also will continue to pursue any housing funding opportunities that we are eligible for under our pro-housing designation. Under our HCV program, we're going to continue to strive for 100% utilization in the hopes that we will get an increase in that budget as well. And we're going to continue to leverage our homeless prevention and rapid rehousing funds. The last year, we released a little over $867,000 in program funding. Under maintaining a safe and healthy community, we're also going to continue to disperse community grants, including a second round of ARPA funding. Since July 2022, the city has awarded a little over $630,000 to numerous nonprofit organizations, and this doesn't include the last round of funding grants that Council recently approved a couple of weeks ago. These grants continue to be a valuable way to partner with the community and to provide the needed services to enhance Roseville's quality of life. And then the last is investing in a well-planned infrastructure and growth, promoting commercial corridor programs that will attract investment and development. The approval of the specific plans last year was a good first start in kind of putting forward a streamlined path for investment and development along the corridors. We're working with development services and hope that we will come back in the next several months with a package of programs that will continue to support that, including a facade grant program and potentially impact fee waiver programs and deferral fee programs. With that concludes my presentation. We're happy to answer any questions.
All right, Councilman Albert.
Thank you for the presentation. I think economic development has been showing real good positive strides. I was just curious if you had, and I know this is a little bit unrelated to the budget, but you just got back from a real interesting trip, and did you have any positive leads?
So we did have a team that went to the International Conference Shopping Center convention in Las Vegas just last week and came back with a lot of great leads. Roseville, as you know, has a very strong retail market and so very desirable location, which is great to hear. But we also know that there are some changes and shifts that are happening in the retail market, particularly as it relates to retail and big box. And so we've got some great information that we'll be meeting with our development services team on soon to kind of talk about how we address some of those and anticipate some of the change in use in some of those spaces.
And I love that we're being proactive in that realm, so thank you.
Vice Mayor Bernasconi.
Do I have any questions? Nice job.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Rakucci.
Nice job, thank you.
Councilmember Mendoza.
No questions, well done.
One question. So I got caught up in a discussion about the closing of the Boston Market on Foothills Boulevard.
Oh, yes.
Right? And it made me think, do we have, I'm sure we have, right? An inventory of, do we have an accounting of restaurant space in the city that is available?
We do. Well, we have access to an inventory of space that is available in the city.
Okay. I'm pretty sure we did, so, thanks. That was, and thank you for covering the point about small business, because when I was at the Chambers, and you may have still been in the audience, when I gave the closing comments to the Roseville Chamber leadership class, I got asked the question about, well, what about small business? You're all about the Bosch and all that. I said, no, we're not. So, thanks for covering that. Okay. I'll open it up for public comment. public comment, bring it back to the council. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Okay, and Mr. Casey, I think you're going to bring us home tonight, aren't you?
I am. Thank you, Mayor. Before I jump into my comments, though, I did want to mention one accolade for Public Works and our Public Works Director. I think he was being humble. While, yes, that general fund budget is 10 million, the larger portion is 60. A lot of that are grants that they competitively go after and achieve. And I am not only surprised, but impressed almost every budget meeting with the amount of grants that they're able to go after and achieve. And so a lot of that work that's done is done from outside of the general fund that typically the general fund would have to pay for. And so it's good work. Good work on your part. Thank you.
And if it offsets those unfunded state mandates that come down to us. They're driving us crazy about local control.
Yes.
I've exercised my demons.
So with that, I would like to say this is probably one of my favorite times of the year as we wrap up and close out our budget process. And I do want to thank the council for your solid engagement for almost 6 solid months now, starting back in the end of the year and going into February for their formal council goals workshop. And I'd like to thank our staff for their constant dedication and hard work. And one of the best parts of this is going through the reviews and seeing just the passion for community service and the care for community and really wanted to provide those services. And it's both humbling and inspiring to go through that. So I want to thank you and thank you for your efforts on that. And as we go forward, we'll bring forward the budget on the 21st for consideration and adoption, and I look forward to that day as well. So I want to thank you, and I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Yeah, and between now and then, public comment will be welcome. Okay, and that brings us to the second round of public comment on non-agenda items. None. It says here, I'm supposed to ask you if you have anything else tonight. Do you have anything else?
No further reports, Mayor.
None
for me.
Nothing from you either? Okay, all right. Any reports from council members before we adjourn?
I'm good.
I think so, and thanks, everybody, for the great work. This is, I echo what our city manager said. It's a terrific time of the year, so thank you. And we are
Thank you.
adjourned till June 7th.